Okay, so chapter 10. So far we've kind of made our way through some anatomy and just kind of learning the basics. Like I said, back to health class, we learned a little bit about STIs. We've talked about birth control. We've talked about the menstrual cycle. So now we are going to kind of switch gears and talk about pregnancy. So I think from here on out is everything like kind of pregnancy based. So this first chapter is just going over like conception and what happens after that sperm and that egg meet. So just so we're all caught up to where we are today. Okay, can everyone see this PowerPoint here with my little zygote? It's actually probably that's probably a zygote.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So just to revisit what we've already kind of talked about. So every human starts as two gametes. This is what the word I was trying to think of the other day when I was like, what is that called? Gametes. Those are your sex cells. So women have ova or eggs and men have sperm. And when those two things unite, that's when a fetus will start to form. So human development, as we all know, is an ongoing process. I'm going to kind of walk you through how that process starts and what it looks like as we go through the different weeks of pregnancy. Because when we talk about pregnancy, we literally talk to it down to the weeks, down to the day, because so much happens day after day of a pregnancy because these cells are so rapidly changing and growing. And then we'll talk about all of the different things that can happen during that development process. Okay, so this is another thing that I'm going to kind of water down for you. Your book goes into like cellular division and the different types of cellular division. Once again, I feel like this is like very biology heavy, and it's not something that we as nurses need to like really know. So I tried to just water it down to have just basic concepts. So if you do happen to go into your Lippincott text and try to read this part, which you are welcome to do, but you may be like, whoa, she didn't cover any of this, or this is way too confusing. Just focus on what we talk about today in the PowerPoint. I don't want to overwhelm you with all this cellular division stuff. Okay, so we have two types of cells. We have our sex cells, which we'll talk about in a second, and we have our body cells, which are called somatic cells. So our somatic cells are what make up everything else, all of our organs and our tissue in our bodies. Somatic cells have 23 pairs of chromosomes. So 46 total. Each cell has 46 chromosomes. 22 of those pairs are autosomes. They're called diploids. So there's two of them together. And then one pair are your sex chromosomes. So that's what either makes you male or female. So you have that XY or XX. But as we'll talk about, not everyone is XY or XX. There are variations. So I won't go into a whole speech about like intersex individuals, but I just want to make sure that you're aware that that is very much a real thing, that not everyone's chromosomes fit into that perfect little box of XY or XX. Some people have extra X's, some people only have one X, some people have one Y. So that's very important to understand when we talk about gender and sex and how outwardly we present, and then the hormones that we have internally as well. So anyways, yeah, go ahead.
When I was pregnant with my daughters, all four of them, we had to do the genetic testing, and they're all missing their X chromosome.
They're all what? I'm sorry, you cut out for a second.
One of their X chromosomes.
They're all just one X?
Yeah, and they were supposed to be born with either Turner syndrome
Partners, yeah.
and a whole bunch of other different things, but
Yeah.
they measured perfectly fine, so the doctor was never worried.
Wow, that's really
That's
interesting.
amazing.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so maybe they are mosaic. They could have mosaic Turner syndrome where not all of their cells are the same. So some cells may have 1X and other cells have XX. And so that may be why they don't have it, the complications that can be associated with those disorders. That's really, really interesting. So
Right.
things like this, I think, are so important for us to talk about because the general public doesn't understand medicine. And so when we talk about like what's going on in our government, which I'm not going to do that, but I just want to make sure that you as nurses and as medical professionals have that knowledge and that you can share it with others because it's so, so important that we are educating people with actual medical knowledge. So thank you for sharing that. That's really, really interesting.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we talked about our body cells or our somatic cells. So then the other type of cells that we have are those gametes. Gametes are also called germ cells or sex cells. All of that means either your egg or your sperm. Those are gametes. Those are germ cells. Those are sex cells. These particular cells are only found in our reproductive glands. So once again, for a female, it would be the egg or ovum or ova. We've got all these same names for the same thing. And in our males, it would be sperm or spermatozoon or spermatids. That's like the different development stage that they're at. So sperm and egg. Our gametes only have 23 chromosomes. They don't have that other pair yet because they haven't met with the other gamete. So that they're called haploid as opposed to diploid, which were the body cells because they have a pair. So these are just 23 chromosomes. Each sperm or each egg is haploid. Okay, so when we talk about cellular division, we have two different processes depending on if it's a somatic cell or if it's a germ cell or a sex cell. So for our somatic or our body cells, so the majority of our cells, they use a process called mitosis to replicate and divide. So basically you have your initial cell here at the top with the 46 chromosomes. And then when it divides into two more cells, those cells each have another 46 chromosome pair. So they're not exactly the same, like not every single cell is exactly the same, but they're very, very similar and they have the same number of chromosomes as they begin to divide. Now, our gametes or our sex cells use a process called meiosis. Meiosis is a little confusing. It's actually a lot confusing because it's not as simple as just like, oh, it divides and now we have two more cells. The process of meiosis is multiple steps at different times during the development of a human, like when we think about puberty or when a baby girl is developing inside her mother, like there's you're already going through one process of meiosis, but you don't complete the entire process until that particular egg is fertilized years and years later. So it's a very confusing process, and that's why I'm like, I'm gonna water this down. There is a YouTube video if you guys do want to watch. It's like a little cartoon. It goes a little bit more in depth than what I'm going to go into depth, but if you are interested in like this type of medicine, then it's just a little video that talks about the difference between mitosis and meiosis. So I will not be offended if you don't watch it. It's okay. Okay, so just quickly here, when we think about meiosis in males, which is also called spermatogenesis, which is to create new sperm, it's just a fancy word to create new sperm, that process begins when that male starts to go through puberty. And like I said, it's a multiple step process. So you have these primary spermatocytes, so like these brand new sperm that are kind of starting that journey. They undergo the first division, and then they go through their second division, and then gradually they will mature into their like final form or that spermatozoa. So like sperm, what you and I think of, like they're mature. All of this happens in the testes of males. Now, meiosis in females is called oogenesis, kind of a fun little word. So same thing, it's the creation of eggs or ovum. They complete the first meiotic division before ovulation. So this is like back when they are developing in their mother's womb. And then they have, and I'm not even going to go into detail, there's these polar bodies that get created. So you'll see a picture here of these like polar bodies. You guys do not need to know about polar bodies. But as they go through this cell change, they create these extra little polar bodies. The secondary oocyte, so as it starts to mature and change, that begins that second division at ovulation, but doesn't get completed unless that egg is fertilized by a sperm. So a lot of our oocytes or our eggs don't even complete their meiosis because most of them are not going to be fertilized. So this is a picture from your book, just trying to show you a little bit about meiosis. So you see here, this is male over here, and then female. This is what I was talking about that creates these like polar bodies. And eventually these turn into other things, but we don't need to go into all that. Okay, that's all the cellular division I'm going to go over, so you guys can breathe a sigh of relief. We are done. All right. Let's talk about conception. So conception is when the sperm and the egg meet. So I have a cute little visual here of our little egg, all these little sperm around it, and then we have one little sperm that was our winner that made it through into that egg. There's a lining around an egg. I can't think of what it's called, zona P something, that sperm was able to get through there, and then it kind of seals off and it prevents any other sperm from entering into that egg. And then immediately that process of cellular division will start to happen. It's really crazy. So anyways, so conception requires the perfect timing of ovulation, the release of that egg, and then ejaculation. So that sperm needs to be within the female reproductive site, so in like the fallopian tubes. The ovum has the capacity to be fertilized for about 24 hours after ovulation, whereas sperm can live up to 80 hours, but most survive about 1 to 2 days. So that's why if you are trying to conceive, it's good to have intercourse in your fertile window, since you don't exactly know the exact time that you are going to ovulate. A lot of practitioners will tell couples to have intercourse every other day during their fertile window. And we do every other day because we want the male's body to have a chance to kind of build up their sperm again and have enough. It gives you the best chance of having as many mature sperm as possible to try to fertilize that egg. So usually your fertile window is somewhere around day 10 all the way to day 18. And that can be different per person, but that's like a pretty big window that if you're having intercourse every other day, it does give you a pretty good chance of conceiving. But remember, it's not just like that 1 month you could conceive. It takes an entire year sometimes before you're considered having issues with fertility. Okay, so let's see here. Oh, another thing. So conception is also called fertilization. So I want to make sure if you guys see a question or if you're reading something and you see the word fertilization or you see the word conception, those are interchangeable. So just know that that means the same thing when a sperm meets an egg. Here's a little 5-minute YouTube video that shows kind of that process. It's kind of a cool video if you guys want to watch it. Another picture from your book, just kind of describing that process of fertilization or conception. Here it is, zona, what is that, pellucida? I don't know. That's that like protective barrier around the egg. So you can see here that once that sperm enters, immediately those chromosomes start to mix and the nuclei start to mix, and it now becomes one. Pretty cool. There's those little polar bodies I was talking about. Can you guys see my cursor? I never know if you can see my cursor when I have. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. It's nice to have like a pointer. So anyways, like when I was talking about how like the cellular division and meiosis in females, those polar bodies, they're over here. Anywho. Okay, so now that we have had fertilization or conception, let's talk about what happens after that. So we have stages of fetal development, and fetal development is broken down into 3 stages. You have your pre-embryonic, which is the first 2 weeks, your embryonic, which is week 3 through week 8, and then anything after 9 weeks on is fetal stage. So lots and lots of different things are happening during these stages. Okay, so let's talk about the pre-embryonic. So this begins immediately at fertilization. When that sperm and that egg meet, we are now in our pre-embryonic stage of fetal development. This stage lasts through the end of the 2nd week post-fertilization. Fertilization typically happens, like where the sperm and the egg meet, it typically happens in what's called the ampulla, which is the outermost half of the fallopian tube. I think I have a picture of that coming up just to give you a visual. We call this bundle of cells right now a zygote. So it's called a zygote, and it now has a diploid number of chromosomes because we had the sperm and the egg meet, and we've added all those chromosomes together. So it has 46 chromosomes, which is called diploid. And like I said in our very first lecture, and our very first thing, was the first thing I said, the sex is already determined because the each sperm either has an X or a Y chromosome, and then it meets with that X egg. And I already mentioned there's some variations to that, but so right now we have determined the sex of this developing little zygote. Oh, here we go. Okay, so fertilization or conception, this is the ampulla. This is a very like interesting drawing of a fallopian tube and an ovary, but this is the ovary. The egg got released from there. Here's your little fimbriae that like pulled it into the fallopian tube. It's making its way here. There happen to be some sperm coming up here, and then they met right here in the ampulla. So I want to make sure you guys know that this is fertilization. There's a lot of fancy words, and I don't want you to get them confused. So conception and fertilization happens in the fallopian tube. Okay, so still within our pre-embryonic, those first 2 weeks, we have cellular division that's happening. So, which is cleavage when we're making more cells and we're doubling and quadrupling. And this bundle of cells, as this is happening, it starts to travel towards the uterus. So about 3 days after fertilization, this little bundle of cells is called a morula, which means little mulberry, which I just think is the cutest little thing. I don't know what a mulberry is, but it must look like what this looks like. So little mulberry around 3 days. And then a couple days later, around day 5, we have even more cells, and we call it a blastocyst. This blastocyst has a couple different layers. The outer layer, which is also called the trophoblast, is what will eventually become the placenta. So it will nourish this bundle of cells. The inner layer of the blastocyst is what actually develops the fetus or the baby. The blastocyst, it's getting larger. There are more cells, and it needs more food and more oxygen to continue to grow. So it makes its way into the uterus and attaches to that inner lining of the uterus, which is called the endometrium. That attachment is called implantation. So a typical pregnancy is blastocyst is gonna implant in the top of the uterus, which remember is called the fundus. That area is really rich in blood supply and oxygen. So that's why that blastocyst wants to get right there. It wants to get all of the nutrients and oxygen that it can. And that's going to be most successful for pregnancy. Now, that doesn't always happen, right? There's always variation. So this isn't a perfect world how it's supposed to, quote unquote, happen. This is just an illustration kind of showing you all of those things. So we have our ovary here. We have our different follicles at their different stages of development. We have that primary follicle that was the one that was chosen to get larger and larger and develop that ovum. At some point, that ovum is ready to be released and for ovulation to occur. So this is showing you ovulation right here. Here's your little ovum. It got released from the follicle. These little fimbriae pulled it up into the fallopian tube. It's making its way over here into the ampulla, where there just happened to be a bunch of sperm. One little sperm got in there, and now we have fertilization. And then now we start that cellular division. Here's our little morula or mulberry. And then it's going to get bigger, bigger, bigger. Now we call it a blastocyst. That blastocyst implants into the top of the uterus or the fundus. And that's implantation. That's around 7 to 8 days after conception, after fertilization. All of that has already happened, which is just mind-boggling that happens that quickly. This is just showing you the changes here. So from week 3 to week 8, it's just incredible how much development happens just in those few short weeks. So here are some actual pictures. So 4-week embryo, a 5-week embryo, and 6 weeks. Huge, huge changes. Okay, so that was everything pre-embryonic. Now, some of those pictures were in other stages, but let's talk about embryonic stage. So this is from the beginning of the 3rd week all the way through the 8th week after conception. During this time, we start to have a bunch of differentiation. So we have these germ layers that start to form, which start to create different areas of the fetus. So the ectoderm is what will become the central nervous system, the special senses, the skin, the glands. The mesoderm is what's going to create the skeletal system, urinary system, circulatory system, and reproductive organs. And then the endoderm is going to be the respiratory system, liver, pancreas, and digestive system. So all of these layers, all of this is happening, all this differentiation is happening during those first few weeks here. By the end of the 8th week, all of those major organ systems are in place. Now, they definitely need to mature, but they are all in place. So why I bring this up is because a lot of people don't even know that they're pregnant yet. If you are someone who doesn't have regular periods and maybe your cycles are all over the place, or you've got a lot going on in your life and you're just not paying attention to your period, you may have no idea what's going on inside. And during that time, you're smoking, you're drinking, you're being exposed to certain chemicals, you're on your prescription medications for your chronic illnesses, whatever it might be. And during that time, all of this fetal development is happening. And so we have to think about how that can affect that fetal development. So those things are called teratogens. Teratogens are things that if we are exposed to in pregnancy, we know that they can cause issues with that fetal development. And it really just depends on what stage of fetal development we were in and what type of exposure we had, what type of teratogen we were exposed to. So teratogens, any substance or organism, physical agent, or deficiency during gestation that is capable of causing some type of anomaly or disrupting that normal fetal development. The severity of that defect, like I said, just depends on what we were exposed to and what time of in that fetal development process we were at. So things can be ingested like prescription medications or over-the-counter medications, drugs, alcohol. It could be an infectious agent, so things like chickenpox or cytomegalovirus, which is CMV, rubella. It could be an environmental exposure like x-rays. So just a lot of different things. And if you don't know you're pregnant, then you don't know to avoid these things. Okay, so after that 8th week, we now are in our fetal stage. So from 9 weeks until the birth of that baby, we are in our fetal stage. We call it a fetus at this point. During this time, we have that all of those organ systems are going to mature, they're going to grow. The central nervous system, which we have started to develop, it is vulnerable to those teratogens and things like that throughout the entire pregnancy. So there are just certain things that while you're pregnant, you just have to avoid the entire pregnancy because, this baby is still developing, especially the central nervous system. This is just a picture from your book, kind of just giving you some like milestones here. So at 12 weeks, we have sex organ differentiation. 16 weeks, we can see the fingers and toes. Around 20 weeks, baby can start to hear. Lungs begin to develop around 24 weeks, but they are definitely not able to sustain on their own. Bones are fully developed by 32 weeks. So pretty cool that you just kind of have these milestones to think about. A little video about fetal development if you guys want to watch that. Okay, so let's talk about some of the supportive structures of pregnancy. So the placenta, and I'm a weirdo, but I love a placenta. I think, and Nicole's like, absolutely not. I think they are the coolest thing that our body creates this organ, and it's a pretty large organ. It's about the size of like a small dinner plate, weighs about a pound or so. It's just the coolest thing. But I also understand, I can respect that other people think that they are gross. Whatever. You do you, I'll do me. So I do have some cool pictures of placentas though. So it is the organ that sustains and nourishes this growing fetus. It has three main functions. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
I
do you
have a
placenta?
question. Yes, I have a question. My babies,
Okay.
we are an adoption family. So this
Mhm.
is a dumb question, but do you not have a
Nope.
placenta until you're pregnant, then your body makes one, or does every female have one?
Nope, you create it with each pregnancy, which is just the coolest thing. So not only are you creating an entire human being, but you have created an organ to sustain the life of that human being. And so each baby, each time you're pregnant, you create another placenta. And then after you birth the baby, the placenta will come out and then everything's all new again. So really, really cool.
And
That's
then
not a-
in the chat, Tajay was saying that she thought it was so really cool. Yesterday at clinical, we got the opportunity before the cesarean section took off that we were going to see. One of the scrub nurses that was an RNFA got to take out the placenta that was from one of the other sections, and she opened the bucket and she let Paige and Tajay take it out and play with it, and they got to hold it, and they got to see the maternal and the fetal side. They got to see the cord insertion site, and I got to show them the things and you know what I mean? So the filamentous insertion and all of the things, and it's just like you said, it's such an amazing part of it, and how some moms now are choosing to do certain things with the placenta. So which we'll get into, and it's just very awesome.
Yeah, I just think it's so interesting and so cool. And I think I'm just one of those people that I'm not very easily grossed out. So
Me
yeah,
either.
I mean, when you hold a placenta, like it's got some weight to it. It's
Yeah.
just really, really neat. So I'm glad that you guys got that experience. That's very
Oh
cool.
yeah.
Okay, so some functions of a placenta. Big thing is it provides and transfers nutrients from mom to baby. So it will transfer all of the necessary nutrients that the baby needs to grow over from mom to the placenta to the baby. And then any kind of waste products that the baby has, it will go ahead and filter through the placenta back to mom to take care of. So just a really, it is the life sustaining organ for this baby. It also is a barrier to certain substances. So no, it cannot keep everything out, but it does act as a barrier to a lot of things. And then it functions as an endocrine gland and it actually produces hormones, estrogen, progesterone. So we'll talk about all of that. So it is its own little factory. Very, very cool. There are tons of different variations to placentas. We're not going to cover all of them, but Nicole had just mentioned a velamentous cord insertion. So I think I do have a picture of that somewhere, but there's all these things that can happen with the placenta where it can affect the baby's growth. It can cause complications, but sometimes the placenta is able to still reroute things and work just fine. So super cool. And then I said it's about a pound or so, which is about 1/6 of the weight of the baby. Okay, so here are my placenta pictures. Ooh, I just love them. Okay, so I really like this picture on the right because it shows you the membranes as well. So this is the side of the placenta that the baby sees. The other side, which is right here, is what's actually attached to the endometrium, to the mom's like uterus. It's also called a decidua that it's attached to. So some people call this the shiny Schultz and the dirty Duncan. I don't know why. I guess two dudes named Schultz and Duncan, one of their names on something. So whatever. But why I really like this picture. So you see this membrane here. So if you think of when a baby is inside of their water sac, that's the sac. It's just broken open. So you get to see that membrane, which I just think is so cool. So babies are in this sac of amniotic fluid, and they've got their placenta and their umbilical cord, and they're just hanging out and growing in there. So cool. And then here's a picture of the shiny Schultz again, so same side as here. And it's just really neat. You could see all of these blood vessels, this amazing blood supply. This cord here, a lot of the blood has already drained out of it, but you can kind of see a little bit better here. Oh, so neat. Okay, so this is from your book, just to kind of give you an idea of what's actually like going on inside the placenta. So this is like a cross section of it. So over here is the maternal side, so like mom's uterus, and then this is the fetal side where baby would be growing. So over here is like your shiny Schultz and your dirty Duncan. And then inside is this crazy network of blood vessels and a membrane that separates mom from baby. So technically, mom and baby's blood is not supposed to mix. We'll talk about how that can sometimes happen, but there are membranes that separate mom from baby. But we still need to be able to exchange nutrients and waste. So there are these, they look like little trees right here. They are chorionic villi, or what these little trees are called. Those contain the fetal blood vessels, and this is the intervillous space. So this is the space between mom and baby where mom brings in that oxygenated blood, comes into contact with these chorionic villi, baby gets that oxygen, and then we'll kind of talk about that process with fetal circulation. And then the same thing, that waste would come back through here, would get filtered through there to mom, and then mom would go ahead and get rid of everything. Okay, so let's kind of talk about the steps of that exchange process with that fetal from mom to baby. So the placenta transfers nutrients like oxygen and glucose to the baby. while removing waste products like carbon dioxide and urea. So mom's blood that's rich in oxygen and nutrients reaches the placenta at that intervillous space. In that intervillous space, we have those chorionic villi with the fetal blood vessels. That exchange of nutrients and waste occurs by either simple diffusion or active transport across a thin membrane that separates mom's bloodstream from baby's bloodstream. So right here, they do not normally mix. So this is just another like up close of the chorionic villus or chorionic villi, and it shows you our fetal vessels here. So there's a whole bunch of those. Okay, so here's some placental variations. So a normal placenta, your cord insertion is like kind of right in the middle there, and the placenta is like nice and round. Blood vessels are kind of equally distributed. Right here, this is called a marginal cord insertion. So instead of being in the middle, it's kind of off to the side here. That can be fine. Like I said, like some placentas still function well, but it could affect the blood flow, and then that would also affect the growth and development of the baby. Some placentas have an extra lobe or accessory lobe, and so instead of being nice and round, they have this like little extra piece to them. Once again, could be totally fine. And then this is a velamentous. So Nicole had mentioned a velamentous cord insertion. So velamentous, so here's the meat of the placenta, and then here are like the membranes, that bag of water, and the cord actually will attach kind of in that bag of water almost, and then the vessels kind of traverse over the bag of water, and that can disrupt the amount of blood flow and nutrients, and those babies can grow smaller. So they have more testing throughout their pregnancy to watch that growth and make sure that, you know, everything is okay. Something else that can happen with a velamentous cord insertion is depending on where the placenta is, if it's lower in the uterus, in that, here, give me 1 second, because I feel like I need to use my hands. Okay, so if this is the uterus, and instead of your placenta being up high, it's down low, and then you have that velamentous cord insertion kind of coming over this way. And here's the cervix down here. So those vessels, the blood vessels, are like across the cervix, and then here's the umbilical cord. If that mom's water breaks, it will slice through those blood vessels, and ton of bleeding. All of baby's blood will be coming out because we've cut through those blood vessels. That's called a vasa previa. Those are really, really rare, but super dangerous. So for somebody who, that's something we can see on ultrasound, but not everybody gets good prenatal care. So sometimes we don't know about that until we're in like an emergency situation where it's already happening. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that little thing about a velamentous cord insertion. Very rare, but I have seen it. I've actually had a friend who had it. Okay. So I've mentioned the fetal membrane, so that's the bag of water. That bag has 2 layers. It has an amnion and a chorion. The amnion is like the inner layer, and then over top of that is the chorion. It is a pretty strong bag. Like when they go to break your water, they have to use typically like a little hook it's not super sharp, but it's sharp enough that it kind of pierces that bag. So kind of like popping a balloon. Like if you guys think of like playing with a balloon, like you can squish a balloon, you can poke it. Normally it's not gonna pop, but if you have a really sharp nail or you take scissors or a pen, it'll pop. So it just needs a little bit of a force to pop it. And that's kind of what the membranes feel like, that same kind of thickness. And then the amniotic fluid is what fills inside of that sac. It's made up mostly of fetal urine, actually, and then just kind of wastes and things like that. Amniotic fluid is really, really important because it surrounds the entire developing baby. So the baby's kind of floating around in there, and it allows the baby to grow unrestricted. They can move unrestricted. It allows the cord to have space to kind of move around so it's not getting compressed and cutting off blood supply. And you think about, we just talked about all this fetal development. If baby, while they're developing their arms or their legs, is smashed up against the uterine wall, they're not going to develop those body parts because they don't have room to. So we need that amniotic fluid to surround that baby. And then they can grow, they can move, they can do their thing. And then the umbilical cord, which connects the placenta to the baby, has 2 arteries and 1 vein. Make sure you know that. 1 big vein and 2 arteries, and we'll talk about how those work. Okay, I forgot I had a slide on amniotic fluid. So the amniotic fluid surrounds the embryo. The volume or amount increases as the pregnancy progresses, and it's about 1 liter or so at term when baby is ready for delivery. It does help remain like a constant temperature for baby. And then it helps, sorry, I got a message from my daycare. I wanted to make sure it wasn't something crazy. It helps permit symmetrical growth. So like I was saying, baby can grow appropriately. It cushions from trauma. So, if mom's belly gets bumped or she's laying on her belly, gives a little bit of cushion there. It helps to keep the umbilical cord free from compression. So we want that umbilical cord to float around as well because we talked about those blood vessels that are in there. And it promotes fetal movement to enhance development. So we need baby to be moving around because it helps them develop their muscles and skeletal system. Okay, I love the picture.
Sorry,
go ahead. Yep.
So Tony asked a question. She said, is the baby taking in any of the fluid when in womb and when they open their mouths, and breathing confuses me? Yes. So they do take in the fluid in even closer to like the end of the pregnancy. When they take in the fluid, they start to create, and I'm sure those who've had babies, they end up forming what's called the meconium stool. So if they get further along in the pregnancy, or the baby ends up having fetal distress, and they have what's called a meconium in their amniotic fluid, or they have what their first stool is, a meconium stool, that black, thick, tarry, green, black stool. That's partially what is made up of that first stool. It's that amniotic fluid in there. So yes, they do take in that fluid.
Yep, they do. It helps their lung development too, to have that fluid in their lungs. So, and their lungs don't need to function to oxygenate. They just need to develop. So it's pretty cool. Yep. They do practice breathing by swallowing that fluid and breathing in that fluid.
Sorry to
Okay.
stop you.
No, you're fine. So this picture here is what's called an ENCAUL birth, ENCAUL, which means that the baby was born in their amniotic sac, so it never ruptured. This happens very rarely, but every once in a while. I've got to see this twice in my career as a labor and delivery nurse, and it's just such a cool thing to see. Like, this is exactly what the baby looked like inside the uterus. So the cord was just around the baby's head hanging out, but there's lots of cushion there, so it's okay. And then big sack of water here. This water does look, I don't know if it's just the picture, it does look a little meconium stained, but it could just be the lighting in this picture. But see how it's kind of like a greenish tinge here, but that could just be the lighting. It's tough to say. But this was a C-section, which you're more likely to encounter an ENCAUL birth with a C-section, whereas opposed like a vaginal delivery, all that squeezing, you're more likely to have that bag of water just naturally bust or pop on its own. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the umbilical cord. So this is the cord that goes from the placenta to the baby's umbilicus or belly button. And like I mentioned before, we have 2 arteries and 1 vein. This is bold, this is underlined, it must be important. Your vein is larger than your 2 small arteries. And then around these vessels is this like gooey substance called Wharton's jelly. Wharton's jelly is kind of like, I'm trying to think of something to describe it with. It's like a goo, but it stays, it doesn't like go everywhere. It's what can I describe that with? It has such an interesting texture, like a Neato
It's
ball.
almost like
Have
those,
a Neato
yeah, it's
ball.
almost like those squish balls that kids play with and they
Yeah.
accidentally cut it and it just stays in
Yes.
place, but they can still like get into
Exactly.
it.
Yeah, it's
Yep.
exactly like that. So you have those 3 vessels, and then you have your Wharton's jelly that surrounds it, and it helps to provide some cushion. That way, when baby does lay on their cord, which happens all the time, or mom's like laying on her side and maybe the umbilical cord's there, that Wharton's jelly will then take on that compression instead of the vessels. So the vessels will remain open for blood flow, and the Wharton's jelly is what's getting compressed and not the vessels. So we love Wharton's jelly. Now, if this is an area of nursing you go into, you are going to see some babies that are born with these wimpy cords that have no Wharton's jelly, and you're like, oh, well, that's why we were having all these issues with the heart rate during labor, which will make more sense when I get to the fetal heart rate chapter and we talk about fetal monitoring. But we like Wharton's jelly. It is good stuff. Okay, so let's talk about fetal circulation. So it is a little bit different than like adult circulation. So we have an exchange of oxygen and waste products at that placenta. Our 1 vein in that umbilical cord is what carries oxygenated blood from mom, from the placenta to the baby. This is important. Star this, remember this. The 1 vein is what carries the oxygenated blood to the baby. Those 2 small arteries are what brings the deoxygenated blood from the baby, from the fetus, back to the placenta. So make sure you guys don't get those confused. Fetal circulation is also unique because we have what are called fetal shunts that help to move blood through the baby's circulatory system in a way that allows the most oxygenated portion of their blood to get to their most important developing organs. So these 3 shunts kind of move blood differently throughout their body to help sustain the growth of some of those lesser organs and then give our priority organs the most oxygen that they can. So those 3 fetal shunts that you do need to know, so I would star this as well. The first one is the ductus venosus. This shunt connects the umbilical vein, which remember is what brings oxygen to the baby. It connects the umbilical vein to the baby's inferior vena cava, and it's going to shunt blood away from the fetal liver. So some blood does still go to the liver because we want to keep the liver alive and growing, but it doesn't need to function. When baby's born, it needs its liver to function, but right now it's got a placenta to be its liver. So we just need it to stay alive and to grow. So a little bit of that oxygenated blood goes to the liver and the rest of it, boop, bypasses there because we have that shunt. So that's the ductus venosus. The next shunt is the foramen ovale. And this is a little opening between the right and the left atria in the baby's heart. So that oxygenated blood comes into the right atria, and then it does go down to the right ventricle, but just a little bit of it, because we do want to oxygenate the lungs, but we don't need the lungs to function, right? We want them to grow, but they don't need to actually function like you and I need our lungs to function. So most of that oxygenated blood is going to go to the left atria, and it's going to go on up to the baby's brain. So that's the foramen ovale. The ductus arteriosus is the last shunt. It connects the main pulmonary artery to the aorta, and it also shunts some blood away from the fetal lungs. So both the foramen ovale and the ductus arteriosus shunt blood away from the lungs. So a little bit of that blood goes to the lungs to keep them alive, but most of that blood, that oxygenated blood, we want it to go to the most important parts. So the heart is important, the brain is important, and then just like the rest of the baby's body. So the ductus arteriosus helps get the rest of that oxygenated blood to the rest of the baby. After birth, these 3 shunts do close. It happens, one of them immediately, and the other ones take a few days to a couple weeks, and sometimes even months after birth. And then we'll also talk about some complications where the shunt doesn't close and it needs to be like surgically corrected. Okay, so I just want to go over that again because I know that fetal circulation is kind of confusing, and there also is a video I think I have in here too if you guys want to watch it. But so once again, we have that oxygenated blood that enters the fetus via the umbilical vein. About half of that oxygenated blood passes to the liver, and then the rest is going to flow through that ductus venosus into the inferior vena cava because we want it to go to the heart. Blood enters the heart and travels from the right atria to the left atria via that second shunt, the foramen ovale. Blood then moves to the left ventricle and then into the ascending aorta, which allows that oxygenated blood to get to the coronary system and then the brain. And that way we have those 2 organs, the brain and the heart, getting the most of that oxygenated blood. Now we have that deoxygenated blood from the superior vena cava that flows into the right atria, the right ventricle, pulmonary artery. And then a small percentage of that blood goes to the pulmonary system, but the majority of it is going to go to that ductus arteriosus and then to the descending aorta to go out to the rest of the baby's body. Then those 2 umbilical arteries are going to take that unoxygenated or deoxygenated blood from the descending aorta to the placenta. And then the whole process starts over again. This book, or this picture, I think is from your book, just kind of showing you. So once again, this is the placenta over here. Here's the maternal side. Here's the connection of the uterus and the placenta. Here's your chorionic villi with your fetal blood vessels, and then your umbilical cord, and it kind of picks up over here to show you the shunts. So your ductus venosus, your foramen ovale, and then your ductus arteriosus. So just another way of kind of looking at stuff. Okay, so here's the video. I think this is the Nurse Sarah video where she compares and contrasts adult circulation to fetal circulation. It's about 16 minutes. So if that's something that would be helpful, sometimes I feel like just hearing it multiple times makes it make sense. So you guys are welcome to go back and watch that video if you think it would be helpful. Okay, and then briefly, let's talk a little bit about genetics. So genetics refers to the study of heredity. So kind of how we like get our like physical characteristics or certain like genetic disorders, things like that. So birth defects and genetic disorders occur in about 1 in every 33 infants born in the US, and they do cause about 1 in 5 infant deaths. Newborn screening is pretty common, so I think we'll talk a little bit more about these tests when we get to prenatal care, but there are some optional screening tests that pregnant women are offered during their pregnancy. So the first trimester screen, or the FTS, an alpha fetal protein screening, AFP, and then amniocentesis. So we'll talk more about that in another chapter. Inheritance. So the nucleus within the cell is the controlling factor for all those chromosomes that we kind of talked about already. And then in our chromosomes, we have our DNA, which is composed of genes that we inherit, some from mom and some from dad. So just a picture of your little chromosome, your genes. A karyotype, you probably have seen, I think this is a karyotype, where they actually isolate your individual chromosomes. So it's just a way to like visually look at them and to see how many you have, to count them. You can look at your, like, these are your sex chromosomes down here. So this is something that they would do a and they can isolate it. When we talk about like what we look like from the outside, that's our phenotype. So things like, you know, blue eyes and red hair, which I have. Whereas your inner genetic makeup is your genotype. So things that you can't see. Okay, so inheritance. So each physical characteristic is coded by 2 or more versions of a gene. And like I said, we inherit those genes from our parents, and they are either homozygous or homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive. And so if you guys remember, I don't know if you guys did this in school, but I think I remember this from biology and, like, I don't know, middle school, doing these little like Punnett squares. And so this top one here is showing you if your mom and your dad both have blue eyes. Blue eyes is a recessive trait. So it's a lowercase b here. So 2 lowercase b's is what gave them that recessive that gene for blue eyes. So if both of your parents have blue eyes, their children will all have blue eyes because that's just the gene that they carry. They don't have any other gene to pass on. Whereas if your mom and dad have brown eyes, let's say, they could also have that recessive blue eye gene, so that lowercase b here. So this kind of shows you if they were to have 4 children, 3 of their children would have brown eyes. 2 of those children would also carry that recessive gene for blue eyes, and then that 4th child would have blue eyes. They would have taken both those recessive genes, one from mom and one from dad, and then their phenotype would be blue eyes, and then they would be able to pass that recessive gene to their children. So something that's kind of interesting here is if both parents have blue eyes, they're going to have blue-eyed children. So if both of your parents have blue eyes and you do not have blue eyes, you could say that that may not be your biological parent, just based on genetics. A little video on inheritance if you guys are interested in learning more. It's 8-minute video. Okay, so this part, your book goes into a whole lot with these different types of disorders. So I just wanted to kind of simplify it and show you just some like common ones that you may have heard of or maybe know someone with. So there are these Mendelian or monogenic disorders. So this is where you inherit a single gene. And then there are different types of those disorders. You guys do not need to memorize this. But things like Huntington's disease, that's considered an autosomal dominant Mendelian disorder. So once again, you do not have to memorize this, but a type of dwarfism called achondroplasia is also considered that same type of inherited disorder. Something like sickle cell is an autosomal recessive disorder, or PKU, which we'll talk about when we get to our newborn chapters. There are X-linked disorders. So anyways, just to kind of give you like a little bit of a reference. And then there are other genetic disorders that have multiple factors. It's not just like one gene. And then we have chromosomal anomalies. So kind of when I was showing you that karyotype, you could see extra chromosomes. So an example would be like someone with Down syndrome. Instead of having 2 copies of the 21st chromosome, they would have 3. You could also, so they could be polyploidy, triploidy, or tetraploidy. So that would be either 2 copies, 3 copies, 4 copies, yada, yada, yada. You guys don't need to know this. So here you go, as an example, because I feel like we're all pretty familiar with Down syndrome. So that is trisomy 21. So those individuals with Down syndrome have 3 copies of the 21st chromosome instead of 2. It is the most common chromosomal abnormality. It's about 1 in every 700 births. And as a woman increases with age, her risk of having a child with Down syndrome does also increase. This here is called a simian crease. So individuals with Down syndrome sometimes have their palms are a little bit different, and they have this straight across line called a simian crease. So one of the things when we're doing our newborn assessment is we actually look at that palmar crease to see if they have a simian crease. It doesn't always mean that individual would have Down syndrome, but it's just something to note. And then just some other characteristics of trisomy 21. We'll talk a little bit more about certain genetic disorders when we get to the newborn chapters at the very end of this course. So genetic counseling, we do talk a little bit about genetics and things like that. If this is an area of nursing you go into, we don't do a ton with it because normally we would put a referral in, and that's like a specialized office and physician that does a lot of the counseling. But like I mentioned earlier, we do offer certain screening tests in pregnancy. So you as the nurse do education on that. So we'll talk a little bit more about those common tests that you guys may actually encounter. So our nursing roles and responsibilities. So this, if we are going to do genetic counseling, it's always going to be best to do it prior to conception. So kind of finding out what genes that person has and could pass on would be good to know ahead of time, because once you've already conceived that baby, there's nothing that we can do to change their genetic makeup. But if they had genetic counseling ahead of time and we found out, oh, you're a carrier for I don't know, I can't even think. You're a carrier for this disorder and your husband is also a carrier for this disorder. Depending on the disorder, we would be able to kind of calculate, okay, this baby has a 1 in 4 chance of having that disorder. So it just depends on what disorder we're talking about. But anyway, so that's why preconception genetic counseling is going to be most helpful. Whereas if you've already conceived, that baby already has its genetic makeup. So there's nothing that we can do to change it. It's good to identify it ahead of time, because then you can kind of get things in place to help care for that child. Maybe it's something that affects them, their kidneys. And so then you would know right away, okay, we need to get in with a kidney specialist, nephrologist, or something like that. So. Okay, a couple of practice questions here. So a nurse educator is teaching a group of students about fertilization. The nurse determines that the teaching was successful with the group when the group identifies what is the usual site of fertilization. Where do the sperm and the egg meet typically?
C.
What do you guys think? Sperm and egg, where do they meet? I've got some C's here in the chat. Yes, it is C, the outer third of the fallopian tube, or that ampulla. So remember that little picture of my little eggy and my little spermy, and they met in the fallopian tube. That's fertilization or conception. Okay, which fetal shunt connects the umbilical vein to the inferior vena cava and shunts blood away from the fetal liver? I know you just learned all these things, so it's okay.
Is it A?
Ooh, yes, it is. So I remember venous vena cava, VV, and then it shunts away from the fetal liver, because I know that that's kind of where the liver is, down by the inferior vena cava. It's like down in your belly. And look at that little cutie in there just growing. Okay. All right, guys. How do we feel about fetal development and fetal circulation? fantastic.
It's
All
a
right,
lot of information. It's just very like, and we get
it's
that.
a lot. It's hard to connect it to anything that you already know because it's all new. But I think
Sure.
it's at least interesting and it's cool as opposed to some
Yes.
other areas of nursing that you're just like, oh my gosh. Or at least that's how I feel about it. I think it's
Right.
cool, but maybe that's why I'm in this
Exactly.
field of nursing. Don't even talk to me about
Totally.
like the kidneys. Don't even talk to me about I don't want to know anything about that, but anything pregnancy related, I'm here for. Okay.
Right.
Why don't you guys take a little 10-minute break and then we will head on to the next. So come back at what, 53?
Yep.
All
If
right.
anybody in the meantime has any questions, you can feel free to come to me in that 10 minutes. If you don't want your break, just, this back in. And
Okay.
connect.
All right. So chapter 11, maternal adaptation during pregnancy. Whew, our bodies go through a lot during pregnancy. Let me tell you. Okay. So a little bit about kind of just age differences in pregnancy. So pretty crazy to think about that our reproductive potential spans about 4+ decades. Oh my Lord. And pregnancy at each age is going to have some unique, differences or needs. So if we think of like an adolescent pregnancy, there might be some additional nutritional needs, psychosocial, financial concerns. In our 20s and 30s, maybe it's more concerns with kind of juggling that career, or if you're in school, having other children as well, maybe some relationship issues. And then over 35, in the pregnancy world, if you are 35 years or older, or if during your pregnancy you will be turning 35, you are considered advanced maternal age, or AMA, which is just like, oh, such a shot to the heart. I am AMA, so I'm always like, can we just like tone it down a little bit? Like, I am still very young at heart. But we do know that there are some increased risks with that advanced maternal age. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about that. But okay, so just some like kind of basic OB information. I tried to include some additional slides because I fully acknowledge that not everyone here has had a baby or has had exposure to pregnancy, or just you may not know this stuff. And for some other people who have had children, or close people around them have had children, some of this is just going to be review. But I think it's important to just kind of start from the basics. So trimesters in pregnancy, normally we break the entire pregnancy into 3 like portions. And it kind of depends. I've noticed that there are some different sources, and like even your OB office may consider the actual like trimesters different. So this is just kind of general. So usually the first 12-ish weeks, so 12, 13, 14 weeks of pregnancy is your first trimester. And then you go into your second trimester, so anywhere from around like 13-ish to 28 weeks is your second trimester. And then anything after 28 weeks, you're in your third trimester. So over here, if you want to think of months instead, sometimes that's a little bit easier for people too. But from like a nursing perspective, if this is an area of nursing that you go into, we don't use months. We don't say, oh, this woman's 7 months pregnant, because we know the importance of literally each day of pregnancy. So from here on out, I don't refer to pregnancy as, oh, she's 3 months, she's 4 months. I go down to the week and to the day, and we will kind of go over why that is important. Okay, so some more kind of general stuff here. So a typical pregnancy, a full-term pregnancy, is around 280 days, which equates to 40 weeks from their last menstrual period. When we say last menstrual period, we're talking about the first day that they bled of their last menstrual period. So it's very specific. So remember when we were talking about the menstrual cycle and I said day 1 of your bleeding is day 1 of your menstrual cycle. When they ask you for your last menstrual period, that is the day that they want you to give. So the first day that you started bleeding of your last menstrual cycle. So that's how we calculate a due date. If it is somebody who has regular menstrual cycles, they would use that date. And then 40 weeks from that date would be their estimated due date for that baby. So once again, we refer to pregnancy in weeks plus days. So it's typically written out like this: 36 plus 4 means 36 weeks and 4 days. 28 plus 3 is 28 weeks and 3 days. 19 weeks and 0 days. So we really do go down to the day. A term pregnancy is considered one that goes to at least 37 weeks. So once the clock strikes midnight and you are 37 weeks and 0 days, you are now term. Anything before that is a preterm pregnancy or preterm delivery, if you do deliver. So 36 plus 6 is preterm. So if you go into the hospital at 11:59 and you're 36 plus 6 and that baby comes out at 11:59, that is a preterm baby. If it would have waited 1 more minute, it would have been a term baby, as crazy as that sounds. But we've got to have something to differentiate. So I know that seems silly. Okay, and then post-term is going to be anything past 42 weeks. Whereas like post dates, you'll kind of hear these interchanged, but post dates would be like after 40 weeks. So your due date is that 40-week mark. So very common for people to go past their due date. Now 42 weeks, that's really, really late to have a baby. And we'll talk about some complications that can happen with those really post dates, post-term babies. Okay, so let's talk about some signs of pregnancy. So your book goes over these presumptive, probable, positive signs. So we'll kind of talk about what those are. So presumptive signs of pregnancy are signs and symptoms that the patient feels or sees and reports to the provider. So it could be something like, I missed my period, or I'm late. I'm feeling nauseous. I'm having some vomiting. I'm feeling really tired. My breasts are sore. I've been peeing a lot. I feel flutters in my belly. So it's the patient is reporting these signs to the provider or to the nurse. These are presumptive signs. The reason that these are not like positive signs of pregnancy is because these could all be caused by different things like hormone changes, some type of GI distress. They could have missed their period because they're stressed out or they're exercising a lot or they have PCOS. So we just can't say like, oh, you're pregnant based on these presumptive signs. Now, probable signs, these are things that the practitioner, so the doctor, the midwife, the nurse practitioner, these are things that we can measure, we can do a test for, but we still can't say with 100% certainty that they're pregnant. So these are probable signs. So during a pelvic exam, a practitioner can look for what's called Goodell's sign, which is a softening of the cervix. The cervix, which is that tube that opens up from the vagina to the uterus, is usually pretty hard. And so when you're pregnant, it starts to soften up so you can feel that difference and it looks different. So that's Goodell's sign. Chadwick's sign is a bluish hue that the practitioner can see in the vaginal tissue in the cervix, and that's because during pregnancy we have all these new blood vessels. It's super, super vascular, and so it looks a little bit blue. So that's called Chadwick's sign. Heger's sign, also during a pelvic exam, they can kind of feel that lower portion of the uterus, that isthmus, where it kind of thins out at the bottom, and it'll feel softer. That would be a really like astute practitioner that they could feel that. But Ballottement is a word to say like when you are doing an internal exam and you are either by the cervix or in the cervix, you feel something in the uterus, and then you push on it and it bounces up and down. That's ballotable or ballotment. So that still is just a probable sign because maybe it's a tumor. There are a lot of other things that can cause some of these symptoms, as crazy as it seems. And then even a positive pregnancy test, you would think, well, you're pregnant. You gotta be if you got a positive pregnancy test. So a pregnancy test measures HCG, or like the pregnancy hormone that you probably are all familiar with. And it is the earliest like marker of pregnancy, but there are actually a few conditions that also produce HCG and can give you a positive on one of those urine pregnancy tests or a blood test. And so that's why it's not a positive, definitive sign of pregnancy. We still need to go a step further to say, yes, this person is pregnant. So just remember that a positive pregnancy test is a probable sign. Okay, so what are the positive signs then? Well, can we hear a fetal heart rate? So a trained practitioner either uses a Doppler or can see on ultrasound a fetal heart rate. Or a trained practitioner feels fetal movement. They have their hands on the woman's abdomen and they can feel that fetal movement. So it's not the mom that feels the fetal movement because a lot of times it's gas that she's feeling. Whereas a trained practitioner would be able to differentiate, or just an ultrasound where we can actually visualize a fetus inside that woman. Those are positive signs. Those are the only positive signs that we can say for sure this person is pregnant. Pretty crazy. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about that due date. So an EDD is an expected or an estimated delivery date. It is not 100%. It is an idea to give us a little bit of guidance. You may also see it abbreviated as EDC, which is kind of an older term that stands for estimated date of confinement or estimated date of conception. Basically, all it is just saying that we think the baby's going to come around this time. We can calculate a due date with a last menstrual period, like I said, but that person would need regular menstrual periods. So, if somebody who, they do menstruate every 28 days, then pretty like accurate for their estimated due date. But for those people who maybe have cycles that are anywhere from 30 to 38 days apart, that's going to be a lot more tricky to get that estimated due date based solely off of their last menstrual period. So we usually use a combination of factors to figure out an estimated due date. Another common one would be an ultrasound. So most of the time now, when you are pregnant, you will have an ultrasound, a first trimester ultrasound, where they will measure what's called a crown rump length or a CRL. That's the top of the baby's head to their booty, their crown to their rump. And then that measurement is pretty accurate for how many weeks pregnant. So they'll take the information of their last menstrual period and they'll take that measurement from the crown rump length. And depending on how similar it is, that helps them decide on the due date. We can't really use crown rump length past the first trimester because then it's not as accurate. So you really need to have that first trimester ultrasound for it to be the most accurate, because eventually babies take up a lot of space in the uterus and it's hard to get those measurements exact to do like an estimated due date based on those measurements alone. So anybody who's been pregnant may have gone to the doctor and then you go back a different day and they've changed your due date. And I'll tell you what, that really pisses people off when their due date changes. But just know that it is an estimate. We're just human. We don't know for sure. So we just have to use the information that we have, your periods and an ultrasound. And no, it's not 100%. And even if we were 100%, we know that babies can come early, right? And we know that babies can stay in longer than they're supposed to. So it is an estimated due date. So I always remind my patients that this is not 100%. Now I will tell you, just as a fun fact, one of my sons was born on his due date, which is really, really rare, but he was ready to come. So anyways, Okay, another thing that we can use, we don't really, but you could use if you didn't have access to all these other things, is Nagel's rule. So what you would do is you would need to know the last menstrual period of that patient, and hopefully they have regular menstrual cycles. You would take the day that they give you. So my example here is if they tell you that the first day of their last period started on June 10th, you take that day and you add 7 days to it, which would take you to June 17th. And then you would subtract 3 months, which would put you in March. So then you take your 17 and your March 17th, and then you change the year based on, so if this was, if it was June 10th of 2025, the due date would be March 17th of 2026. Does that make sense? So this is just, once again, a rough estimate, but Nagel's rule, you add 7 days, subtract your 3 months, and then adjust your year if you need to adjust your year, and that would give you an estimated due date. Okay, another thing that we can use is some other like measurements that we can do in the office. So we know that using a Doppler, which is like that little handheld ultrasound device that they put on the abdomen, we can start to hear the fetal heart tones around 12 weeks, sometimes earlier. If you have a patient whose BMI is pretty low, you could even hear them around 9 weeks, but that takes a pretty small patient. But 12 weeks across the board, we should be able to use that Doppler externally on that woman's abdomen and hear that heartbeat. So it's just kind of a gauge like, okay, she's at least 12 weeks. Another thing that we could do is based on like fetal movement. So most of the time, most people will start to feel fetal movement by 20 weeks gestation. That first time you feel fetal movement is called quickening. That's just what they call it. I don't know why. If you've had a baby before, usually you start feeling fetal movement a little bit before that, just because you kind of know what to feel for. Whereas if it's your first baby, you're like, I don't know, I've never felt this before. So it just takes a little bit longer for you to realize like, oh, that's what I've been feeling. It also just depends on the position your baby's in and where your placenta is. I've had 2 pregnancies, and my placenta both time was in the front. It's called an anterior placenta. So that means I have my own body tissue, a placenta, and then my baby behind that. So when my baby would move, he would be touching the placenta. So it's more difficult for me to feel that because he's touching a placenta and not like my uterine wall. So anyways, different factors like that, but it does give you an idea like, okay, they're feeling fetal movement. I can hear with a Doppler, like it kind of helps gauge, okay, they must be at least this far along. This would be people who have no prenatal care and just kind of show up. Another thing that we can do is a fundal height. So that's what's showing you over here. A fundal height is measuring the fundus. The fundus is the top of the uterus. As baby grows, the uterus grows, and that fundus comes up, up, up into the abdomen. And so we can measure the top of the fundus, and it correlates, that measurement correlates with how many weeks gestation that person might be. So we measure in centimeters, and the centimeters correlate with weeks. So like for example, if we put our measuring tape, you put the bottom of the tape by their pubic bone and then bring it up to like their belly button, let's say, it should be around 20 centimeters, which equates to 20 weeks gestation. There are variations. It can be off by 1 or 2 centimeters. Also, it depends on like the body habitus of that person, where their belly button is. Like, you know what I mean? Like your belly button may not be in the same place as my belly button. So we base it more off of like where the fundus is, the top of the uterus, and then the measurement on the measuring tape. If that makes sense. So just different ways that we can try to gauge how far along someone is if they didn't have prenatal care from the start of their pregnancy. Okay, so talk about some anatomical and physiologic changes during pregnancy. So this picture here is showing you everything that gets compressed and relocated, because now you've got this big old baby and this big old placenta and this bag of water taking up all this space. So all of those organs are going to get smashed and displaced elsewhere. One of the big things here is you see your diaphragm that's been pushed up, and your stomach that's getting squished in your bowels. So you can probably imagine that this is going to cause some GI disturbances and maybe some breathing issues. Okay, so specifically, what's going on with the uterus? So the weight of the uterus increases from 1 ounce to about 2.2 pounds. And then around 12 weeks, it has grown enough that it can now, it's now outside of the pelvis. So it's like outside of the bone, the top of it, the fundus. And so that's why you can do that fundal measurement with your tape and you can kind of feel the top of the uterus. The walls of the uterus do thin, but they actually are stronger because they have this fibrous tissue. So they may be thinner, but they're stronger. We'll talk about cardiovascular changes, but the cardiac output of the woman increases significantly, and about 20 to 25% of that cardiac output goes just to the uterus because it needs so much blood supply and oxygen. And then pretty common to have those Braxton Hicks contractions throughout pregnancy. Braxton Hicks are just like little cramping practice contractions that the uterus does. So that's not actual contractions for labor. It's just these little like mild practice contractions. A lot of times women will experience more of those if they're dehydrated because the uterus is a big muscle and muscles need a lot of hydration or else they get crampy. The cervix, so we talked about Chadwick's sign with all those new blood vessels. So the cervix can soften and become kind of bluish in color. We start to form a mucus plug, which is just as disgusting as it sounds. It's a big old hunk of mucus that sits right in there and it plugs up the cervix and it helps to keep bacteria out from the baby. So it's like it's a plug and it's mucus. It's gross, but we're thankful for it. It does good work. Okay, what's happening with the vagina, the perineum, and the vulva? So what I was saying earlier, we have that increased vascularity. It's because of our estrogen levels. We have increased vaginal discharge, which is a fancy word called leukorrhea. That just means vaginal discharge, a lot of vaginal discharge in pregnancy. The acidic environment, like of the vagina, helps to prevent bacterial infections, but pH increases in pregnancy, and so we're more prone to like yeast infections and BV and things like that. The ovaries, we don't need our ovaries to do their typical work because we conceived, so they just kind of hang out for now. That corpus luteum, which is that follicle that opened up to release that egg and now gets that fancy name corpus luteum, remember it starts to secrete progesterone, so it's kind of managing the progesterone in those initial few weeks of pregnancy, and then eventually once the placenta is developed enough, the placenta goes ahead and takes over and it starts to produce the progesterone. So about 6 to 7 weeks, the placenta will now take over and then the corpus luteum goes away. The breasts enlarge and become tender. We have increased alveoli, the areolas, so the area around the nipples darkens. The little bumps on the nipples, the tubercles of Montgomery, will enlarge and sometimes can secrete a little bit of substance. And then you can also start to have a little colostrum, which is that precursor to breast milk. Some of that can already start to leak during pregnancy. Okay, so mom's blood volume increases pretty dramatically by 30 to 50%. This peaks around 28 weeks, which is the start of the third trimester. Some women, you can hear a little systolic murmur because of this. Plasma volume increases up to about 50%, but our red blood cells only increase slightly to about 450 milliliters. So we have this kind of like dilution effect. So you have all of this plasma volume, but only a few extra red blood cells. And so this causes physiologic anemia. So pretty common in pregnancy for the woman's hemoglobin to drop up to 2 milligrams per deciliter. You're considered iron deficiency anemic when the hemoglobin is under or 10.5 or under. And at that point, they would have you take additional iron supplements, and depending on how low it is, some women need iron infusions and things like that. As far as blood coagulation, so there's no change in like clotting time or bleeding time, but we do have increased clotting factors. So that increase in clotting factors, as well as like venous stasis. So when you're pregnant, your blood flow to like your lower extremities is impeded by your growing belly and uterus, and you can have that pooling effect in those lower extremities. We have more increase in clotting factors, so we're more at risk for blood clots. So you're in this hypercoagulable state during pregnancy and postpartum. As far as cardiovascular changes, so when the uterus starts to grow, pushes that diaphragm up, it does displace the heart a little bit. The heart itself does enlarge a little bit. And like I said, we can have a little systolic murmur. Cardiac output can increase up to 50%. Remember, about a quarter of that goes just to the uterus. It increases by 10 weeks, and this peaks around 24 to 28 weeks as well. All these cardiovascular changes pretty much peak around between that second and third trimester transition. Stroke volume increases 50%. And so your actual just like resting heart rate, very common for it to also increase somewhere between 10 to 30 beats per minute at rest. So, if you're normally sitting at 70, you may be closer to 100 now. Blood pressure. So blood pressure does decrease slightly in the first and second trimester, but it does kind of go back to normal as you approach delivery. The slight decrease is because progesterone is being secreted, and progesterone decreases vascular tone, so it kind of opens everything up. And so you're more likely to have postural hypotension. So that's why when you're pregnant and maybe you're changing positions, you feel lightheaded or dizzy. So you just have to be a little bit more careful. Or if you're standing with your knees locked for a long time, you're more likely to feel lightheaded and dizzy. So always counseling my pregnant patients to change positions slowly and stay hydrated. Let's see, systemic vascular resistance decreases during pregnancy, kind of the same thing. You have that vasodilation from progesterone and another hormone called relaxin. Something else that's really common is this supine vena cava syndrome. So as we progress in pregnancy, the weight of the baby, the weight of the uterus, if a woman is laying on her back, which is what this picture is showing you, here's her spine, here's her aorta and vena cava, and then her growing belly here. If she's laying flat on her back, this extra weight is going to compress those great vessels, and she's going to feel lightheaded and dizzy, maybe sick to her stomach, does not feel good because her blood flow is being impeded. So that's why we're always telling women to position themselves on their side, or at least kind of like just not flat on their back, like a little wedge under one side or the other. And that way those big vessels are not being compressed at all. Okay, respiratory changes. So the diaphragm rises up to 4 centimeters, and then the chest circumference increases to about 5 to 7 centimeters. So anybody who has experienced pregnancy may have noticed that afterwards, like your bra, your band size has changed because your actual like rib cage expands from trying to make room for this baby. And that's very, very common. Let's see, progesterone. So it causes an increase in tidal volume and a decrease in PCO2. So a pregnant person is going to be breathing faster and more deeply because that baby needs more oxygen. So you'll notice either from people around you that are pregnant or you yourself when you're pregnant, it is hard to kind of take those deep breaths. Even at rest, you may feel short of breath. It shouldn't be to the point that it's disruptive or you feel like you can't breathe. It's just a little bit more difficult to catch your breath. I noticed a lot when I was pregnant, when I would talk a lot, I did a lot of teaching, that it would be really hard to just talk because talking requires a lot of breath work and stuff. And so I would just be like trying to get through like one thing I was teaching a patient. So it's just tough, man. All right, so GI changes. So the mouth, so gums will become soft and edematous. A lot of times your dentist can tell when you're pregnant because they bleed. Your gums will bleed much more easily and they're swollen and red. Something that can happen for some women is hypersalivation. Oh, it's so miserable. These poor women make up to 2 liters of saliva per day, as crazy as that sounds. So you will encounter pregnant women who have to carry a cup with them to spit into because they have so much saliva that they cannot just keep swallowing it. They have to spit it out. It is incredibly miserable. It is also a little gross, but I mean, what else are they supposed to do? It's just absolutely miserable. I mean, that's not a super common thing to have that amount of saliva, but I have taken care of quite a few patients that did have to carry a cup with them. In the esophagus, so once again, that progesterone is relaxing everything, including the cardiac sphincter. The cardiac sphincter is what helps to keep your stomach acid in your stomach. So when it's relaxed, it opens up a little bit, and so you're more likely to have that stomach acid come up to the esophagus, and so you're going to have things like heartburn, indigestion, like sour belly type of stuff. GI tract compression can also cause heartburn. Everything is pushed up, and then constipation. So things are just not moving like they normally do. Gallbladder, you're more predisposed to like gallstones. From a liver perspective, you can get these like little spider veins. You can get red palms, which is the palmar erythema. Your liver like function tests, so your albumin decreases and your APT increases, cholesterol increases. So I always think it's funny when my OB patients go to their PCP just like for their normal like annual checkup, and they check their cholesterol and it's elevated. I'm like, well, yeah, she's pregnant. Don't check her cholesterol right now. Don't get her all concerned about her cholesterol. She's pregnant. So don't get your cholesterol checked in pregnancy. Thyroid enlarges, but still functions the same. There's an increase in basal metabolic rate by about 25%. The parathyroid increases, increased secretion of hormones to kind of meet the calcium needs. And we also do recommend that pregnant women get a little extra calcium either through their diet or maybe a calcium supplement if there's someone who can't handle like dairy. Pituitary, we no longer need that FSH and LH, which remember was our follicle stimulating hormone and our luteinizing hormone, so they're currently suppressed. Our prolactin is increased, and our oxytocin is also circling around because it helps with contractions eventually, and then lactation, and prolactin helps with lactation as well. Adrenal glands, so we have decreased cortisol clearance, so we have increased levels of that, which helps with both mom and fetal development. Aldosterone, we have increased secretion. It protects the woman from sodium loss, so it keeps her blood volume up, but she may have that like edema, a dependent edema. There's a big section in your book about insulin and glucose. So during early pregnancy, our maternal glucose levels actually decrease because the fetus has such a high demand for glucose. So mom's giving a lot of that to the baby. So because of that, the mother could have some episodes of hypoglycemia. And so we're always telling our patients to make sure that they're eating small meals frequently. So mom is giving glucose to baby, but baby makes its own insulin. Sorry, my throat is dry. I keep having to take little sips of water. So the fetus must produce its own insulin to help facilitate the entry of glucose into its own cells. After the first trimester, hormones from the placenta act against insulin, and so it requires more insulin to be secreted. So this is kind of where we can get into a situation where like a woman could develop gestational diabetes. So she could be a perfectly healthy individual with, as far as like outside of pregnancy, no risk factors, and then she can develop gestational diabetes just because the demands are so different during pregnancy. Okay, so some endocrine changes. We talked a little bit about the placenta. So the placenta secretes that HCG, that pregnancy hormone, that can be detected in urine about 11 days after conception. It is a way that we can confirm pregnancy. Remember, it's not a complete positive, but it's a tool that we can use. It also helps to maintain that corpus luteum until the placenta can take over. And then the levels of HCG double about every 2 days. And so sometimes during pregnancy, they will monitor that level to make sure it's rising appropriately or going down appropriately, depending on what's the circumstances. The placenta also produces human placental lactogen, or HPL, which produces insulin resistance and makes adequate glucose available to the fetus. So it's all helping that fetus grow as much as it can. It secretes estrogen, which helps with vasodilation and softens the cervix, helps with breast development. And then that progesterone, which helps to relax all the smooth muscles and help with blood flow to different areas. It also aids in breast development, and it helps to make the endometrium, that uterine lining where that placenta has attached, nice and rich and thick. That way it has a really good implantation and can provide the best nutrients to that baby. Our changes in metabolism. So as we've said 1,000 times, the fetus has constant need for glucose. In a fasting state, ketosis can develop really rapidly. So that's why, once again, pregnant women need to eat small, frequent meals often. We can have insulin resistance that develops, and then we have that issue with gestational diabetes that we'll talk about. There's an increased need for iron, so we do recommend that women take iron during pregnancy and maybe even additional iron depending on what their hemoglobin is. We have that water retention aspect, so really common to have edema, especially in the lower extremities. We get concerned when mom's having a lot of edema in her face or her hands. That could be a little bit more concerning for things like preeclampsia. So we'll talk about that as we go on. As far as our energy requirements and weight gain, so technically our caloric intake really only needs to increase by 300 calories per day. I know for me during pregnancy, I consumed a lot more than 300 calories per day extra because everything just tasted so delicious after the first trimester. First trimester, no thank you, but second and third trimester, whew, those cravings, man. But technically, we really only need about 300 extra calories per day. As far as like weight gain, it really just depends on what your pre-pregnancy BMI was. So if you were starting pregnancy with a quote unquote normal BMI, then it's very typical to gain somewhere between 25 to 35 pounds by the end of the pregnancy. Most of that is the second and third trimester that you put on most of that weight. For our protein requirements, we need protein for growth and repair of fetal tissue, the placenta, the uterus, the breast, everything. Mineral requirements, so most women are going to be directed to take like a prenatal vitamin to help make sure that they're meeting their mineral requirements, or through diet as well. That's fine as well. Just most people don't have like a well-rounded diet, but we need iron for formation of hemoglobin, and we need calcium for nerve cell transmission and muscle contraction, bone building and blood clotting, phosphorus, zinc, iodine. So all of these things have a purpose, and they could all be found in like a multivitamin or like a prenatal vitamin. The big thing that's a little bit, I think of as like kind of, I stress more than those other things, because those other minerals, like any prenatal vitamin, that's fine, whatever. But we really have to be careful with this folic acid. Folic acid is so important. It's also called vitamin B9. Folic acid is necessary for the formation of the nervous system of the baby. So by taking an adequate amount of folic acid, which is somewhere between 400 to 800 micrograms daily during pregnancy, we can prevent up to 70% of neural tube defects. That's huge. Neural tube defects are things like spina bifida. So a neural tube defect is where the neural tube, the part of the spine, doesn't form correctly. There's some defect in there. So there's other things as well, but spina bifida is probably the one that you are most familiar with. And it doesn't mean that somebody who had a child with spina bifida didn't take folic acid or did something wrong, because it's 70%, it's not 100%, but it's just something that we know can help with that, can improve that outcome. So I do always stress my patients to make sure that they check their prenatal bottle and make sure it has at least 400 to 800 micrograms of folic acid. Other things that we need, vitamin A, but not too much. Too much can be toxic. So I always think of things like anybody who's been on Accutane, that's a huge dose of vitamin A. And all over that, it says, do not get pregnant. Every single pill, there's like a pregnant woman with an X through it, and you have to be on 2 types of birth control, yada, yada, yada. So too much vitamin A, not a good thing, but you do need some vitamin A. Vitamin C, vitamin B6, and vitamin B12. So they all have things about them that help with the development of baby or just maintaining mom's body as well. Okay, so as far as like nutrition, so direct effects of maternal nutritional intake do affect fetal well-being and the weight of the baby. So low weight gain of mom could cause the baby to have growth issues, or too much weight gain could also affect the baby. Talked about prenatal. We talked about increasing protein, importance of iron, folate, which is folic acid, and then our caloric intake. So I feel like we covered all of this. As far as fish, so we do want to encourage our pregnant patients to eat fish if that's something that's part of their normal diet. There are just certain fish that they have to avoid. There's like 4 of them that are really, really high in mercury, like swordfish, shark, king mackerel, and I can't remember the 4th one. So we just want to be careful with that. And then also we don't want them to have fish for every single meal. I think it's somewhere between 6 to 12 ounces per week, depending on the type of fish. So it's just like an education piece that we do with our patients. Things that we want them to either avoid or kind of watch as well is we don't want them to limit their intake of food, but we also don't want them to eat too much. So kind of keeping that 300 calorie in mind. Want to make sure that they're washing all of their fruits and vegetables really well. Any dairy products that they consume need to be pasteurized. We don't want any kind of raw meat or raw eggs. So if they have, let's say like a steak, it needs to be well done. If they have an egg, it needs to be cooked all the way through, no runny like yolk or runny white. So we just talk a lot about that. And things like, I'm sure you guys know, like deli meat needs to be heated up until it's steaming and consumed while it's hot. We just know that certain types of food are at higher risk for things like listeria or E. coli. So anything that we can do to kind of mitigate those risks. Now, is it the end of the world if your patient accidentally has a turkey sandwich or, forgot to wash their apple? No. And you're going to give a lot of reassurance. We just do the best that we can to try to mitigate those risks when we can. So it's not the end of the world, but let's see, I think everything else we did. Some just special considerations. You're going to encounter patients that may have different dietary restrictions. So things like vegetarians or vegans. We usually, if a patient is vegan, then we would have them meet with a dietitian and maybe even a vegetarian, just to make sure that they are still getting their required nutrients, specifically like protein and iron. If you're lactose intolerant, as far as like calcium, there's lots of calcium supplements that are just fine. And then something kind of strange that can happen in pregnancy is this condition called pica. And some of you may have experienced this. I feel like every time I teach this, I have a student who's like, yeah, I had that, or my sister had that, or that's really common in my culture. So pica is where you have this craving, this urge to eat something that is not nutritional. It has no nutritional value. So like a common one is ice, like just crunching on ice. Other things would be like powders or starches, baking soda, drywall, sand, dirt. So I know that sounds pretty crazy, but it just is this overwhelming, like consuming thought that you want to consume that thing. So it happens in pregnancy sometimes, and sometimes it's linked to anemia, and other times it's just like a spontaneous thing. So we just want to make sure our patients tell us like, hey, I've been really wanting to like eat this entire box of baking soda, that way you can be like, hey, don't do that.
I have one, Megan. It's actually funny that you mentioned this. A couple months ago, I had a student in OB and peds in the LPN room. She was sitting there. I was teaching her in lab, and she had her jar of cornstarch, and she's sitting there eating it. And I said,
Cornstarch. Yep.
"You're not.
Mhm.
That's cornstarch." And she said, "Yeah." I said, "That's so funny that you're eating." And I kind of it took the moment to
Yeah.
educate the class.
Yeah.
So
You're
yeah,
fine.
it's
Yeah. Was
she
she
was
pregnant, or was
pregnant.
it just
Yeah.
she just okay? Yeah. What I realized the last couple of times I've taught is it's pretty common in African
Yes.
culture to have pica. It's very acceptable as well. Like, oh, she's just pregnant, it's fine. But we just have to be careful because some of these things can be harmful, especially in the amounts that they're being consumed. So no, cornstarch itself isn't dangerous, but an entire box of cornstarch probably not
With the
great.
spoon.
And there's no
Right,
nutritional
with the
value.
spoon. I just was like, you really
Which,
should not do that. But yeah, I just wanted to
yeah. Yeah, that's
yeah.
so interesting. Cornstarch is a really like common too. Okay, so urinary system changes. So our kidneys and our ureters do enlarge. Their ureters can get compressed at that pelvic brim. We can have increased incidences of pyelonephritis, so like an infection in the kidneys. We have urinary frequency and maybe some incontinence. The bladder tone is more relaxed. And the capacity and pressure increases as well. So your bladder can be really full and you don't feel a sensation to empty it, or your bladder is getting compressed and you feel like you need to empty your bladder constantly. And then UTIs are pretty common in pregnancy, and they don't always present like a standard UTI. You may not have those normal symptoms. Instead, it could just be irritability of the uterus. So a lot of contractions or crampiness, maybe some nausea, but you don't always have the dysuria. It's interesting. All right, so some other changes. So blood volume increases somewhere around 35 to 60%. We have increased in the GFR, so we have increased urine flow and volume, decreased BUN, creatinine, uric acid. So something that's interesting, like with all of these lab value changes, when you get labs on your pregnant patient, the reference ranges are for people that are not pregnant. So you will notice that they deviate outside of those reference ranges sometimes, but the provider will be like, okay, everything's normal. But the patient's like, they look on my chart and they're like, well, this one said it was abnormal and this one says it's normal, and it drives me nuts because I just wish that they had a panel that would show pregnant reference ranges versus normal adult reference ranges. So if any of you have had that issue personally and you're like, well, my provider said everything was okay, but I can see right here it's not, just know that it's probably normal for you because you're pregnant. You can always ask, but that's usually a really common thing because it changes things a little bit. But as long as we know what's changing it, that's okay. Okay, so the skin, we have lots of skin changes in pregnancy. So I talked a little bit about like those spider veins or like a red rash on your palms. We also have can have issues with hyperpigmentation. So things like this linea nigra, which is that dark line from the belly button down to the pubic area. Not everyone gets that. Normally it's those with darker skin that get that linea nigra, and it does go away after pregnancy for most people, not always, but for most people, or it lightens up quite a bit. And then something called chloasma, or you may see it as melasma. It's the same thing. It's this hyperpigmentation on the face. A lot of times it's on the cheeks here. Striae gravidarum is a fancy way of saying stretch marks. So those can be on the bellies, the thigh, breast, and those typically will lighten up after pregnancy as well, but they don't completely go away. And then you can also get this particular rash called a PUPS rash. It stands for pruritic urticarial papules and plaques of pregnancy. So it's really, really itchy. It's on the abdomen. We don't really know what causes it. There's nothing that we can really give to make it better. And the only thing that makes it go away is delivery, but it's not dangerous. So it's not a reason to like have a baby early, but it is very frustrating because you're so incredibly itchy. All right. Other things like musculoskeletal things, lordosis, which is where your lower spine curves. So I'm sure you guys remember from your when you did like your geriatric rotations, kyphosis, which was the upper part of the spine. This is lordosis, the lower part of the spine that curves because it's trying to offset that growing uterus that you still have balance. Another thing that we have is relaxation of those ligaments. So I talked a little bit about like round ligament pain, a lot of pelvic discomfort because everything is stretching and getting pulled on and carrying this extra weight. Your gait can become unsteady or more likely to have falls. And then this diastasis recti, so a separation of your abdominal muscles. This is actually my belly when I was pregnant with my first baby. So this is my uterus just poking through my abdominal muscles. So it kind of has this like coning effect. And by the grace of the Lord, mine went back. I don't know how, because I had a huge diastasis. Like, I mean, it was a huge area of separation. And I don't know, somebody loves me up there because it just went back. So I don't know what I did to deserve that, but thank you. But anyway, so it's not harmful. It's just, it's frustrating. You know what I mean? Like when your body looks different than it did before. And then some psychological responses. So acceptance of the pregnancy. So I will tell you that even women who are trying for a baby, when they get pregnant, there is still an element of accepting the pregnancy, the reality of it, like, holy cow, this is actually happening. And what does your life look like? It changes every component of your life from there on out. So there is always going to be some acceptance, whether it was a planned pregnancy or not. So kind of meeting that patient where they're at. Mood swings are super common. Body image changes. The idea of becoming a mother, what that means. Your book goes over some like theories, and I hate that stuff so much. I'm going to be honest with you. I just don't think it's really helpful. But if you do want to look at that stuff in your book, you can. I think the overall like encompassing information is the same. You know, we all go through adjustments, and how do we kind of work through, okay, I'm pregnant. What does that mean? How does my role change? How does my relationship with my partner change? How do I keep working? How do I deal with body image issues? So all of those like theories kind of encompass those same ideas. So in response to that, here are just some kind of like normal things. So you accept the pregnancy in your first trimester. Your second trimester is kind of accepting the baby. And then your third trimester is kind of wrapping your head around parenthood. What does it mean to care for this tiny human? Okay, so let's do a couple practice questions. The nurse is obtaining a blood test for pregnancy. The patient asks which hormone the test measures. What is the correct response? So when you take a pregnancy test, what are we measuring?
Okay.
Yep, your HCG. That's right. All right, a 26-year-old female is seen in a clinic. She states that her LMP was 6 weeks ago. Which signs and symptoms would be considered presumptive for pregnancy?
B. Uh,
You can select all that apply.
A, B, and C.
B.
A, B, C.
Hey, good job. So Chadwick sign and positive pregnancy test in the office would be your probable signs. The end. We did it. Hooray. Okay.
Nope.
Not really what was covered. I know with taking this class previously, the instructor before, we did a lot of questions with that like due date calculation. Did I understand correctly that you're saying that we're not going to be tested on that?
You could get a question on Nagel's rule. Is that what you're talking about? Like Nagel's where you
Yeah,
get
like she had a lot of them. Like we had to calculate that quite a bit.
You could get a question. I know it's something that we do in lab as well, so that is a
Okay.
possibility. So just kind of
Okay.
know that you would take the last menstrual period, add your 7 days, and subtract 3 months. Just kind of commit
Okay.
that to memory if you need it. But it's not like you're not going to get to your exam and have 5 questions on Nagel's rule. Like can't be
Okay.
doing. But okay.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else have any questions? All right, let's power through. Chapter 12, so nursing management during pregnancy. Okay, so prenatal care. Prenatal care is all of the care that you get during pregnancy. So from the very first visit all the way up until delivery. So our goal is obviously healthy mom, healthy baby, and it has been proven, like getting good prenatal care has been proven to improve the outcomes of that pregnancy. Early is always going to be best. If you can start your prenatal care in that first trimester, that's always going to be like ideal. And then of course, preconception counseling. So when we talked about like all the things you can do before you get pregnant to kind of set yourself up for success, of course, that's going to be ideal. As far as like the schedule of when you have appointments, it kind of varies like where you get your prenatal care, but this is just kind of like the typical schedule. So you're seen about once per month during that first and even into the second trimester. Some offices will see you more frequently, or if there are complications, of course, you're going to be seen more frequently. And then once you get a little bit further, like into your third trimester, they're going to start seeing you every 2 weeks and then weekly the last few weeks of pregnancy. So you don't have to memorize this schedule because it is different depending on where you get your prenatal care. So this is just kind of giving you an idea, but not something you need to memorize. Okay, so let's kind of break down what we as nurses do when somebody comes into our clinic for that initial prenatal visit, because that visit is really like the longest one. It's where we get so much information. So what do we need to kind of start out when somebody finds out they're pregnant? So we do a med-surg history, just like we do on all of our patients. We do a physical exam, a head to toe. We do certain diagnostic tests, which I'll get into that. We're going to assess for certain risk factors. So that could be things like genetic disorders. It could be chronic conditions that they have. If they've had previous pregnancies that had certain issues like preterm labor, preterm deliveries. So we kind of cover all of that. And then we do lots of education. So a lot of the education, if it's their first pregnancy, they're going to need more education about what to expect, what's normal, when to call, when to go to the hospital, so things like that. We do a lot of counseling on nutrition, and we talk about those teratogens, things that they need to completely avoid or things that they need to at least like limit. We talk about that folic acid supplementation, why that's important. Encourage them to take a prenatal vitamin. Most prenatal vitamins we can just get over the counter, but some people prefer a prescription. that's fine. We talk about weight gain, so we get their weight so we know what their starting BMI is, and that way we can kind of counsel them on how much weight we would expect them to gain throughout their entire pregnancy. And like I said, if you have a normal BMI, pretty common to gain around 25 to 30 pounds, and this kind of just tells you the breakdown of where that weight goes. We talked about all of that already. I think we're good. Okay. I know I mentioned iron supplementation already. When we talk about iron with our patients, though, we want to make sure that they know how to take it, why they're taking it, and some side effects. So I always try to tell my patients to take their iron with orange juice or vitamin C of some kind because it helps with absorption. And then I tell them that on top of their pregnancy constipation, iron also causes constipation. And what if they are also on Zofran for their nausea, which also causes constipation? Constipation, like baseline, is miserable. Constipation in pregnancy is brutal. So I would tell them right away, you're going to increase your fluid, you're going to increase your fiber intake, and you are going to be taking Miralax, my friend, because we are not going to get into a situation where you already have this big old baby pushing on your bowels, and then your bowels are all full of stool and you are miserable, and now you're nauseous and now you're vomiting. Like, no, no, no. We are going to get on top of that. So I do lots of counseling. If you can't tell, I'm very passionate about preventing constipation. We talk about folic acid. Remember, you need about 400 to 800 micrograms per day. And then we talk about calcium, either through diet or calcium supplementation. Just some kind of like nutritional risk factors to kind of keep in the back of your mind. So our adolescent patients, those who have had 2 or more pregnancies in the past year, if you have multiples like twins, triplets, whatever, issues with maybe some financial insecurities or food insecurities, someone who's on some type of diet, like a real restrictive diet, or maybe a diet where they're taking a lot of supplements that may not, well, they are not tested with pregnancy, so we want to avoid those type of things. Our patients who smoke heavily or use some type of substance or alcohol. We check their pre-pregnancy weight, certain diets like vegan and vegetarianism. Are they already breastfeeding another child and now they're pregnant? So that kind of changes their nutritional needs. We also will talk a little bit about something called hyperemesis gravidarum. This is a condition that some women can get during pregnancy. And we all know about like morning sickness. It's pretty common to have some nausea and maybe occasional vomiting in pregnancy. Hyperemesis is that like amplified 1,000-fold. So these women cannot keep barely anything, if anything at all, down. No food, no fluids, to the point where they're severely dehydrated and have electrolyte imbalances, and sometimes even need to be hospitalized in their pregnancy to help control their symptoms and to get them the nutrition that they need and to correct their hydration and electrolyte imbalances. So hyperemesis is no joke. And then pica. So we mentioned pica is that kind of weird thing where you eat non-edible items. So we do screening about access to food and storing food, cooking food. Do they have some type of food assistance program? Is that something that we can connect them with? Are they somebody who is really physically active? Are they an athlete? Do they run marathons? Is their job really taxing? So we just kind of do this whole like, hey, tell me about yourself. Like, what do you do? And that way we can kind of look for some of these risk factors. A big thing is going to be lack of knowledge about nutrition. That is a huge thing. Even as nurses, I feel like our knowledge of nutrition is poor. So always something to counsel on. We know that we need to talk about avoiding alcohol. limiting caffeine. You don't have to completely avoid caffeine in pregnancy, but we want to limit it to about 200 milligrams of caffeine per day, which is about 1 small cup of coffee. We do know that increased caffeine can affect growth of baby and cause our babies to grow small. Artificial sweeteners, we want to kind of limit those as well to about 1 to 2 per day. Be really careful with additional supplements, like I said. So any kind of supplements are not tested like by the FDA in pregnancy, like even prenatal vitamins, to be honest. They don't govern that. And so a lot of medication supplements, we don't have a line of pregnant women who are like, hey, yeah, I'll do that experiment. I'll take that medicine throughout my entire pregnancy to see what happens to my baby. So we just don't have that necessary information a lot of times to say like, oh yeah, that supplement from that multi-level marketing company that you are a part of is totally safe in pregnancy, because we just don't know, and it's not worth the risk. So a lot of times we will tell patients, why don't you hold off on that until you're done with pregnancy and done breastfeeding if you're a breastfeeding mom. Let's see. Oh, and then we'll go over her medication list, just like her standard medications, and make sure that they are safe during pregnancy, or the risks and benefits, that the benefits would outweigh the risks. Okay, let's talk about a little bit more OB terminology here. Gravidipara, or G's and P's. I want to make this lingo a part of your world, because when you go to clinical, this is how we talk. It's annoying. If you don't know what we're saying, it is a whole new language. So I want to introduce you to my language. So G's and P's, what I mean when I'm saying what are her G's and what are her P's, it's her gravidipara. Gravida is a way of saying a pregnant woman. So how many pregnancies has that person had? So a gravida 1, also called a prima gravida, is a first pregnancy. That's going to be written out as a G1. This is the very first time she has been pregnant. A G1, a prima gravida. So then a G2, also called a multigravida, is your second pregnancy. A G2, gravida 2. So then you could probably deduce that a G3 is a third pregnancy, a G4 is a fourth pregnancy. So it's just shorthand. It's how we communicate this person has been pregnant this many times. So that's gravida. Para is when a woman has carried a pregnancy to at least 20 weeks or more. Then that gives her a para. So a prima para is the first time that that woman has given birth to a baby of at least 20 weeks. That's also called a primip. Trust and believe, I know this is annoying. It's just how we talk. So a primip is somebody who, this is her first pregnancy, and the pregnancy is at least 20 weeks and she has delivered. Now, para is when you've actually delivered that baby. So a primip. A multipara, she has now had at least 2 or more pregnancies that have been delivered at least 20 weeks. We call that a multip. Oh, we got a multip in room 5. She's 7 centimeters, something like that. So then a nullipara is a woman who has, maybe she's been pregnant, but she hasn't delivered a baby past 20 weeks. So maybe she had like a miscarriage or a loss at 18 weeks or something like that, or 5 weeks. She's a nullipara. So para 0. So gravida are the pregnancies, para are the deliveries after 20 weeks. So just some examples of how that would be written out. A G4P2. So she's had 4 pregnancies, 2 of which were delivered after 20 weeks. We don't know the specifics of anything else, so it's just real quick information. A G1P1, first pregnancy, and then she had 1 delivery. Okay, so then we can use this GTPAL system to kind of get a little bit more information about those G's and P's. So like, were these preterm deliveries? Were they term deliveries? Is she currently pregnant? Are the children living? So it just gives you a little bit more to go off of. So GTPAL is an acronym. G still stands for gravida, so number of pregnancies. And don't forget to count if she's currently pregnant. So if the scenario says a pregnant patient comes in for her OB visit and tells you that she's had 2 other babies, or 2 other pregnancies, then she's a G3 because you want to count that current pregnancy plus the 2 others that she's telling you about. So gravida or number of pregnancies, that's your G. Now your TPAL, this is a way to describe your para a little bit more. So to describe your deliveries a little bit better. So the T is term. And remember, a term pregnancy is any pregnancy that was carried and delivered to at least 37 weeks. So past 37 weeks, 37 plus 0 and on is a term. The P here stands for preterm. So remember, preterm is anywhere from 20 weeks to 36 plus 6. That's a preterm delivery. The A is for abortion. Now remember, in medicine, abortion does not mean what the outside world thinks it means. Abortion means the loss of a baby, a miscarriage, or it could be an elective abortion. Who knows? It's an abortion. It's the loss of a baby. So that's what the A means, abortion. So this would be the loss of a baby before 20 weeks. That would be in your A category. And then the L stands for living, the number of living children. You will encounter patients who, yes, maybe they have delivered 4 children, but maybe one of their children has passed away from SIDS or some trauma or childhood cancer or something like that. And so we need to note that, and so that it's not brought up time and time and time again that, when they come in for their visit. So I'm always making little notes. When my patients tell me something like that, I want to send a message to the rest of the office like, hey, just so you guys know, like, she's been through some crap, like, we need to pay attention. So anyways, so how this would look, I wanted to give you an example. So if someone wrote out, or like shorthand, they like say to you, oh, she's a G3100 or 011. What does that mean? That means this is her 3rd pregnancy. The second number goes with our T here, 1 term delivery. The 0 is with our P, 0 preterm. She's had 1 abortion, so that could be a miscarriage or some kind of loss under 20 weeks. And then she has 1 living child. So she's probably currently pregnant, right? Because we still have that other pregnancy to account for. Okay, does that make sense? I know that this is a little tricky until you've done it, and this is something we can practice in lab. It's a little more hands-on, and we could do it kind of repetition, but just kind of generally, does that make sense enough for you guys to be like, okay, I think I get it, I just need to practice?
I was going to say too, guys, and I know we are going to practice this in lab, but also being that once we get into the amount of living children, that actually takes into consideration the amount of individual people, the amount of individual children. So the gravida is the amount of pregnancies, as Ms. Siska had mentioned. So when you get into the actual amount of children, so you have a gravida 3 and you have a parity of 4, okay?
4.
You're accounting for
And you're like, wait,
multiple
what?
children, because if they had a
Right.
twin pregnancy, okay, yes, they were pregnant, 3 times, but they have a total of 4 children. Exactly, Tony. Yes.
Yeah.
So you're accounting for multiple children in that 1 pregnancy. So that's where it kind of gets a little dicey. So I want to make sure you guys do pay attention to the breakdown of each of these sections. It can get a little tricky, okay?
I will tell you, for my exams, I will never give you an example of a twin pregnancy. And here's why. Because if you check different sources, sometimes they're counted differently with their para. So for some sources, like let's say this is the first pregnancy of someone, so a G1, but it's a twin pregnancy and they deliver those babies, some sources will only count that as one para because it was like one episode of birth. I do not. I was told to count that as a para 2 because she delivered 2 individuals either from her vagina or from her abdomen. And I'm going to give her credit because that's
Exactly.
crazy. And most of you are probably going to be working in areas, if you go into this type of nursing, with Epic. And I will tell you that Epic, the charting system, also counts a twin pregnancy as a para 2. But I do notice, like, if you just do like a little Google on para, it counts it as 1. So because there's that confusion, I just want you guys to know that I will never give you a twin gravida para GTPAL scenario. That way you don't even have to worry about it. But in lab, when we do, there's a GTPAL quiz so you guys can practice. There are some twin examples. So I just don't want you to freak out and be like, she said we weren't going to do this. You will not be tested on twins, but just so you can have some practice. Okay. I didn't make that GTPAL quiz. I hate it. I hate it so much because I don't like that it's.
And then it gives you like the preterm versus, you know what I mean? Because it and then that even breaks it down weird. So, and two, you know, when we get out into the clinical setting, I know some of you go bedside and you like to, and I you know, I'm a strong proponent of talking and getting in there and talking to these moms, talking to these dads, you know, asking questions. If you ask and you sit there and you're looking at it, your GTPA, if you ask, have you had any abortions? So think about this. We want to be culturally and ethically sensitive. So we know, as Ms. Siska said, medically speaking, yes, they are abortions. However, they are miscarriages. So being sensitive to the topic, we can speak together as them being abortions, but, you know, ask them. We need to talk about how to ask them in a way that's not going to be coming at them in a way, and we don't want to break that, you know what I mean, like break that rapport that we build with our patients. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I usually just separate it and I'll ask my patients, have you had any miscarriages? Have you had any abortions? And I mean, I use both terms, but I make sure to kind of separate them, and that allows the person to,
Recognize.
you know, recognize, and then we can have an open conversation about it. So, yeah, and it's just so we can document and we know what they've been through. You know, if you've been through, I don't know, if my patients had 5 therapeutic abortions, that's fine with me. I just need to know, because then I know, okay, was it a medication abortion, or was it a surgical where you've had a DNC? So then your cervix has been opened 5 times. That information is necessary because it lets me know that you could be at risk for preterm labor because your cervix has been mechanically opened a few times. So it's not for me to be nosy. It's, hey, I want you to be successful with this pregnancy if this is a pregnancy that you want to be successful with. So I'm just here to help. Okay. All right. Other things that we gather, age. I mentioned like occupation, you know, how taxing is their job, or how many hours or how many jobs, their education level, where do they live, who do they live with, their ethnicity. We do know that certain ethnicities are at higher risk for certain disorders in pregnancy, their race, their religion, and pets. So I know that seems silly, but we'll kind of get to talking about cats here in a bit. Okay, medical and family history. So a lot of times for this initial visit, they do bring someone with them. It is not always the father of the baby. So I would always clarify that before you refer to that individual as the father. Also, we need to take into account that if they bring a female, that might not just be their friend or their sister, that could be their partner. So I always ask, who'd you bring with you today? What's your, relationship? How do you guys know each other? Try to figure out like, okay, what's the situation here? And that way I can be respectful and acknowledge them appropriately. If they're both moms, I want to call them both mom. So just something to kind of keep in mind. Include the client, include the partner, information to obtain. So we talked about current and past health issues, surgical history, their OB history, their meds, their allergies, if they do know of any inherited diseases, significant health history of their family members, drug use, things like that. I also like to know if it was like an IVF pregnancy. I'd like to know if it was a donor egg or a donor sperm. That's another thing that I've encountered is, or maybe they're a gestational carrier. So yes, that this woman is pregnant, but it is not her baby. So really getting to the bottom of what's going on here. What's the whole picture? It just helps you talk to your patient and give them the best care. Okay, physical exam. So we do get vital signs, and this includes listening to the fetal heart rate as long as they are within that range that we can listen with a Doppler. We do our head to toe. Usually the provider, like the either mid-level provider or physician, is going to do a breast and pelvic exam. And then just kind of general head to toe stuff. So we'll do like deep tendon reflexes, or the provider will do deep tendon reflexes. And we'll get to why that's important here in a little bit. But okay, so let's talk a little bit about the pelvis. We talked about the importance of the true versus the false pelvis. So remember that the true pelvis is the actual like bottom part here where the baby's head goes through, whereas the false pelvis is this top part that really doesn't like dictate anything about delivery. Some providers are able to do a pelvic exam and kind of determine the shape of the pelvis and things like that. We also will collect labs at that first visit. So these are pretty standard prenatal labs. The blood type, including the Rh status. So, AB positive, B negative, O negative, whatever it might be. An antibody screen. Do they have antibodies, like known antibodies? CBC with diff, rubella. So we want to make sure that they are immune to rubella. HIV, they do have to sign a consent for that. Hepatitis B, do they have immunity to Hep B? Syphilis, sickle cell for certain patients, not everybody gets screened for sickle cell. A glucose is not done until 24 to 28 weeks. I think I have a different slide for that, but that's not one of your initial labs. Cystic fibrosis, so like if that's kind of one of those optional like genetic screenings. Once again, this baby has already been, the genetic makeup has already been determined, but some people do like to be screened for genetic disorders afterwards. And then varicella, has she already been exposed to chickenpox prior to pregnancy or not? Other things that we do are an ultrasound to make our positive pregnancy, like, yes, this is for sure. We check a urine and make sure, she doesn't have a UTI. Like I said, you can have that asymptomatic UTI, like you don't have those common symptoms. We also check for protein and glucose in the urine. We'll talk about why that's important later. Maybe a pap smear if she's due. Remember, not every pelvic exam do you get a pap smear, so it just depends on if she's due for a pap. We will do a gonorrhea, chlamydia culture. GBS, group beta strep, is something that we do at 36 weeks, so not at the initial visit. And then if she is having any like abnormal discharge or odors or itching, we could also do a wet prep to check for yeast, trick, BV, things like that. Okay, so a little bit about group beta strep or GBS. This is a gram-positive bacteria that is commonly found in the GI and GU tracts. Very, very normal. It can kind of come and go, and it's not a big deal. Does not harm us as adults with normal immune systems. It doesn't cause us harm. So about 10 to 30% of pregnant women have this bacteria present in their perineal area. And what we do is we want to check for this on all pregnant women around the time that they're going to deliver, so around 36 weeks, so we have the result back before they deliver, because we know that if that bacteria is present, this new baby that's potentially going to be born vaginally with a new immune system may not be able to fight that bacteria like mom can. And so we will give mom antibiotics during her labor that actually pass through the placenta and protect the baby. And then mom has a vaginal delivery. Everybody's cool. But you do need to have that test, have the results, and then get at least 2 doses of ampicillin is usually the medication used as long as there's no allergy to be considered like treated or like in the clear. It's given every 4 hours throughout labor. So anyways, this is something done on all pregnant women. Sometimes even if you're scheduled to have a C-section, they'll still do a GBS swab just in case you were to have a vaginal delivery or like go into labor on your own. But if you bypass the vagina, it's not as big of a deal because you're not, the baby's not exposed to it. So anyways, very common, very normal. I know some patients, it comes back positive and they're worried about it. So just making sure that we know to educate them that, you know, hey, this is normal. Here's how we take care of it. Here's how we keep baby safe. Okay. So then subsequent visits are going to be shorter, kind of short and sweet for the most part, as long as there's not any, you know, issues along the way. So we get blood pressure, we get a weight, we check that urine occasionally. We'll check that fundal height, which usually starts around 20 weeks that we do regular fundal height assessments. We always listen to fetal heart tones, and then eventually we'll start kind of figuring out what position the baby's in, maybe doing some cervical exams as they get closer to labor. So like I said, these are shorter in length. We also want to assess every single time that we see this patient, hey, are you having any changes in fetal movement? Are you having contractions or cramping, pain, any vaginal bleeding, any loss of fluid or trickling of fluid? Are you having headaches, blurred vision, spots in your vision, epigastric pain, swelling? So these are just the same questions we're going to ask almost every single time because it really helps us figure out if they're at risk for certain things. And things that they might not see as like important, like changes in fetal movement. They might be like, oh, this baby's just kind of sleepy today. No, that's a red flag. So that's something that we as practitioners, we pay attention to. So we ask these high risk questions, screening questions all the time. And it also clues your patient into like, oh, I need to be paying attention. This must be like something important. And you tell them, hey, call us if you're having any of these things also. And then eventually we talk as they get kind of closer, birthing classes, pain management options, talk about breastfeeding. Like this isn't something we do at the first visit, but as they get closer to delivery, just to kind of prepare them a little bit better. And then fundal height. So like I said, usually we start doing that fundal height measurement around 20 weeks, and then every visit we'll measure it just to make sure baby's growing appropriately, that fundus is moving up like we would expect. So just generally, we talked about how around 12 weeks the uterus comes out of the pelvis. So it's kind of like at that pubic bone around 10 to 12 weeks. And then around 20 weeks, it's at the belly button typically, or 20 centimeters if we're doing like a measurement. We also measure with like our finger breadths. So you can like put your fingers and do a measurement that way. So like if you touch her belly button, let's say, and you can feel her fundus 2 finger breadths above that, that correlates with like 22 centimeters or 22 weeks gestation. So it's all, a little subjective, but gives you an idea. And then just some more information on fundal height. Something interesting that happens is you see here in this, so at 40 weeks, the fundus is lower than 36 weeks. So here is kind of the highest point that the fundus is, 36 weeks, and then it drops down at 40 weeks. Like, just weird how the numbers go. That's because as we get closer to delivery, the baby will drop down into the pelvis, and so everything goes lower. So the fundus goes lower because the baby is lower. So they measure less than what they did at their 36-week appointment. We call that engagement. So the baby is engaged in the pelvis. So they've dropped down, or people will look at you and say, oh, you've dropped. Like that's what's going on there. Okay, determining fetal position. We can kind of tell how the baby is lying in the uterus somewhere around 24 to 28 weeks. We can do certain maneuvers to kind of feel like externally, we can feel how the baby's positioned. Those maneuvers are called Leopold's maneuvers. It's a series of maneuvers that I'll tell you guys about here. We do that to not only kind of figure out, is this baby head down or butt down, but also to kind of help us find the fetal heart rate. So we use a Doppler when we're listening to the fetal heart rate, and it's ultrasound waves. So just like with any other like ultrasound waves, it can be broken up by like movement. So if the baby's moving their arms or their legs, it cuts through those sound waves. So if we're able to locate the back of the baby, specifically like the back shoulder area, then we know that there's not going to be anything like breaking up those sound waves, so we can hear the heartbeat really, really clear. Do you have to do Leopold's maneuver? Absolutely not. You can just kind of look around and listen, but it's just a tool that you can use to help. So here's what Leopold's is. This is something we can practice in lab, but the first maneuver is you feel the fundus. You feel the top of the abdomen here to figure out what is presenting. So is it a little booty, a little head? Is it the side of the baby? So once you kind of have that figured out, then you take your hands down the sides and you're trying to figure out, okay, where is the back versus where are the limbs of the baby? Once you have that, come on down here to like the pubic area and you try to figure, okay, what's presenting down in the pubic area? Is it a head? Is it a butt? Is it the side of the baby? And then after you've kind of figured out that, then you turn around and you face mom's feet and you just kind of verify everything. So you can grab this presenting part and see if you can like pull it up and down to try to check if it's engaged or not. If the baby is engaged in the pelvis, you're not going to be able to move that baby up and down. Whereas if she's like earlier in pregnancy, you can kind of bounce baby up and down. That's the ballotable. And then it just kind of confirms the rest of your findings. Like, okay, yes, this does feel like a head. This does feel like a back. This does feel like a butt. So I'm not good at Leopold's. I'm going to be honest with you, unless you have a transverse baby, because I can look at you and see your belly is like oblong, but I'm not very good at Leopold's. I'm good if I check somebody's cervix telling if the baby's head down or not, but not just from Leopold's. Anyways, okay, so these are those optional prenatal tests that I mentioned a little bit ago. So these are things that are not part of standard prenatal care, but can be offered in addition to prenatal care, and they can screen for some potential abnormalities. They are screening tests, so we cannot diagnose, and there are always going to be false positives and false negatives that we can get. So that's an important teaching aspect. Another caveat is some insurance companies will not cover these as part of the normal prenatal care because they are optional. So good things to tell your patients, like, hey, check your insurance before ordering these tests because some of them are very expensive. So a common one that we can do is the nuchal translucency. Some people will call this a nuchal. Some people call this the first trimester screen. But it is an additional test that the parents can opt in for. It includes an ultrasound and a little finger stick, so a little blood work. It's done between 11 and 13 weeks. And it is screening for if baby could have an increased risk of having trisomy 13, 18, or 21. 13 and 18 are disorders that are not compatible with life. There's a lot of different chromosomal abnormalities that cause like growth issues and developmental issues and things like that. And then 21 is Down syndrome. And then it also can screen for some congenital heart conditions. So basically, if you get an abnormal result, we would recommend that you go on to have a different test to try to confirm that diagnosis or to rule out that diagnosis. So we don't diagnose based on this screening test. So that's the nuchal. Another common one is this maternal serum alpha fetoprotein, or MSAFP. You can also just get an AFP as well, depending on whatever, you don't guys, never mind. I'm going off on a tangent. So this is a test that is just a blood test. It's done between 15 to 20 weeks. This particular test can also screen for trisomy 13, 18, and 21, but if you had already had screening for that, then they would only do the second part of the test or only screen for the other parts, which is the neural tube defects. So that's the difference here, is it can also screen for neural tube defects, whereas the nuchal translucency cannot. So remember, neural tube defects are things like spina bifida, which we know we can help prevent about 70% of neural tube defects by taking what?
Folate?
Good.
Yeah, folate, folic acid. Good job. Making sure you're listening. Good job. Okay. It also can screen for abdominal wall defects. So things like gastroschisis and phalocele. We'll talk more about that when we get to our newborn chapter. So basically all I want you to know is it's an additional screening test that can screen for neural tube defects or chromosomal abnormalities. Excuse me. Another popular one is the cell-free fetal DNA. Different companies make this one, so you may see it called different things, but it's a small sample of the DNA from the baby. So it's a blood test from mom, just a normal blood draw, and then they're able to isolate fetal cells. Don't ask me how. I have no clue how they get this information, but it's very accurate. It's like 98, 99% accurate. It can be done as early as 10 weeks. I usually recommend my patients wait till about 11 weeks just so it doesn't come back as like insufficient fetal DNA. But it screens for chromosomal abnormalities. So those saying like trisomy 13, 18, 21. It also can screen for those sex-linked chromosomal abnormalities. So kind of bringing us back around, it can screen for things like Turner syndrome, Klinefelter syndrome. So it actually looks at the sex chromosomes, and there are certain disorders associated with that. So anyways, it does not screen, none of these screen for absolutely every disorder under the sun. So that's another teaching point, is making sure your patients know exactly what it screens for and that it does not include, you know, all these other things out there. So, but with that, so because it screens for these sex-linked chromosomal abnormalities, it will tell you the gender of the baby. So that's why a lot of people like to order it, because they can find out the gender early. I had it with both of my kids because I'm AMA, so I'm higher risk, and found out I was having boys at about, I think, 11 weeks. So for me, it was just really fun to like know that ahead of time, and to also have that, you know, reassurance that they were chromosomally normal, so to speak, from the ones that it can screen for. Wouldn't say they're normal, but okay. So our diagnostic test, so if you've had one of those screening tests, it came back abnormal, here are some follow-up tests that can be done. One of them is an amniocentesis. So some of you may be familiar with an amniocentesis. That's where they take that long needle and they put it through the abdomen of a pregnant woman, and they actually get a sample of the amniotic fluid, which would contain fetal cells and fetal DNA, to be able to do a chromosomal analysis and actually diagnose a certain condition. So a friend of mine, like, she had done the cell-free fetal DNA. Actually, she did a first trimester screen that came back abnormal. She also did a cell-free fetal DNA that showed that the baby may be at risk for Turner syndrome. And then she had an amniocentesis, which confirmed the diagnosis of Turner syndrome. So her little girl does have Turner's. Turner's is like 99% miscarriage rate. And she has a healthy little girl with Turner's. So she's doing really well. So amniocentesis is a way that we can confirm a diagnosis. And once you have that information, that can kind of guide that patient on, okay, now that you have this diagnosis, does that change what you want to do with your pregnancy? So for some individuals, that would help guide them towards like a therapeutic abortion, depending on what state they live in. Or it would help them kind of get set up with maybe some support groups or reach out to some mom groups. I know my friend, she got together with a bunch of moms around the US who also have girls with Turner syndrome. So for some people, they just, they want that information so they can get ahead on it. They can already call a pediatrician. They can already get all of those specialists in line for delivery. Or if they want to terminate the pregnancy, then they know that information ahead of time. They've confirmed the diagnosis and they can terminate the pregnancy. So it's just, everybody's different. Everybody wants to know that information for different reasons. So just making sure that we are having those tough conversations. Another option for diagnosis is a CVS, a chorionic villus sampling. So very similar to an amniocentesis, but instead it can be done a little bit earlier, and they're getting a sample of placental tissue to do that testing with. Okay, so ways that we can examine for well-being throughout pregnancy. So we use ultrasounds, we use Doppler flow studies, which kind of tell us about like blood flow to the placenta. We can do NSTs, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We can do vibroacoustic stimulations where we kind of like buzz mom's belly to see a reaction from baby, contraction stress test, biophysical profile, and then just like kick count. So I'll talk to you a little bit more about all that as we go on. Okay, so an NST, pretty common prenatal testing. A lot of times this is done in an office, or if you go to the hospital and go to like triage to get checked out. We hook moms up to the fetal monitors, the external fetal monitors, and you plug them into this little thing here. A lot of times they get a button to push if baby moves, and then it records on this graph paper the fetal heart rate and contractions. So it gives us information about if the placenta is providing enough nutrients and oxygen to where the baby is, thriving and having appropriate responses in their fetal heart rate. So what we're looking for are accelerations in the heart rate, which I know you probably don't really know that terminology just yet because we haven't talked about it. But basically, I just want you to know that the NST is a test used. It's called antenatal testing. So testing that we do throughout pregnancy to give us information if the baby is well oxygenated and doing well. And what we want to see are accelerations of the heartbeat, or that the baby is moving and doing well. So it's just a test that we can use throughout pregnancy. And then a biophysical profile we can use in combination with that NST, or we could just do the biophysical profile. There's a scoring system. So a biophysical profile is an additional ultrasound that's measuring certain things. So it's measuring the fetal movements, the fetal tone, the fetal breathing. So are they practicing using those lungs, the amount of amniotic fluid around the baby, and then we can also add in points for their NST results as well if it's a full BPP. So if it's either going to be a modified BPP or a full if we include the NST. Each parameter is worth 2 points for a total of 10 if we include the NST. It takes about 30 minutes to do this ultrasound, or you get 30 minutes to kind of get points for these things. If your end score is like an 8 or a 10, that's good. That lets us know that baby's doing well, baby's got good oxygen, baby's moving like normal. We can go ahead and just continue on. But a score of 6 or below is concerning, and we need to follow up. We either need to do additional testing, or if the score is like a 2 or a 4, you're going to go to the hospital and probably deliver, because that's concerning. Oh, here's a picture of a Doppler. So I keep mentioning like a Doppler to listen to the heart rate. So it uses sound waves. So we have to use a little contact gel. So with your Doppler, you're going to have a little squeezy bottle of gel to put on there. Ooh. That was weird. Okay, sorry. If baby is in a head down position, so if head is down here, you are most likely going to hear the fetal heart rate below the belly button. So usually it's on one side or the other, or maybe the middle. But if you have your patient come in their term, they're, I don't know, 38 weeks, and you're finding the heartbeat up here above the belly button, I would be a little concerned that the baby might be in a breech position. So just kind of keep that in mind, that if a baby's head down, it should be pretty low. The heart rate should be found pretty low in the pelvis. Just think about the anatomy, like that's kind of where the back and the shoulder of the baby are. Whereas if the head's up here, then the shoulder of the baby's going to be up here, and you're going to hear the heartbeat up here. Breech baby, it's fine. It's just we don't do a lot of vaginal breech deliveries here in the United States. So it may be something that patient was expecting to have a vaginal delivery, and now we're talking more about a C-section. So just something that you would want to report to your provider. Just some tips for when you're using a Doppler. You can always take mom's pulse simultaneously so that you know that you're listening to baby versus mom, because if mom's tachy, it may be hard to tell the difference between mom and baby. You may hear some different sounds. It's something that you have to do kind of over and over again so that you can distinguish the sounds, because there's also this like whooshy sound that's actually like the placenta, like the blood flow. So you just have to be able to differentiate. It also can be more difficult the larger your patient is, because if they have a lot of adipose tissue, those sound waves are having to travel through all of that excess adipose tissue. So it's more difficult to find the heartbeat and to hear the heartbeat. Just some basics. We'll talk more about fetal monitoring next week, but a normal fetal heartbeat is somewhere between 110 and 160, and it fluctuates all the time. So anything over 160 is considered tachycardia. Things like fever and distress can cause that. Anything below 110 is bradycardia. Fetal distress can also cause that, or a certain heart block that babies can have. Okay, so managing discomforts. I've already kind of talked a little bit about round ligament pain. So here it shows you those ligaments that hold the uterus. So here's non-pregnant, here they are just kind of sitting, and then pregnant, they are getting all stretched out. So you can imagine how uncomfortable that feels. It's a very sharp sensation, usually when they're moving side to side. So just kind of reassuring them, it usually goes away very quickly. Telling them to change positions slowly, maybe do some stretches, take a warm bath, things like that. Another discomfort, urinary frequency. So, if they're further along in their pregnancy, it's more just like mechanical pressure. This baby is pushing down on the bladder. So, just making sure that they're not restricting fluids, that they are staying hydrated and, going to the bathroom when they need to, even though it's disruptive. And then, of course, reporting any signs of, UTI if they do have any of those symptoms. Another common one mentioned, nausea and vomiting. So not hyperemesis, but just, kind of like that morning sickness, which is not just in the morning. I don't know why they call it morning sickness, but this is caused by hormones of pregnancy, or maybe heartburn or indigestion. We do a lot of teaching about small, frequent meals, bland foods, or any foods that they can tolerate, maybe trying some ginger or peppermint tea, trying to stay hydrated, avoid caffeine or carbonation. For some people, carbonation helps, so that's fine. I always tell my patients that it's like survival mode. So as far as like protein and this and that, whatever they can handle in that first trimester. Baby will get what they need, but you just have to survive. So it also can be helpful to have like crackers at your bedside before you get up in the morning. Have like one saltine cracker, get up, have one saltine cracker, and just kind of slowly, ease into it. But keeping something in your stomach is way better than having an empty belly. So it seems counterintuitive, and then of course we have prescriptions that we can give as well. So a big teaching point is making sure our patients know to call their provider if they can't keep anything down for 24 hours. We do not want them getting dehydrated. Okay, so hyperemesis, I mentioned this before. This is severe nausea, vomiting, where you can't keep anything down. Causes severe dehydration, electrolyte imbalances. You'll see ketones in their urine. These individuals need an IV. They need IV fluids. They need antiemetics like Zofran and Phenergan, and they may need to have like stay in the hospital for treatment for a little bit. Just depends. Indigestion, heartburn, we talked a little bit about what's kind of causing that. Some teaching that we can do would be avoiding, certain foods. A lot of times it's like spicy foods or tomato-based things, all the delicious things in life. Telling our patients that they can sleep kind of upright, like extra pillows, to avoid eating too late. So maybe eat dinner at 5 o'clock, and that way your food has time to settle before laying down. Avoiding large meals. There are some antacids that are considered like safe, like Pepcid and Tums. And then just making sure that we're differentiating between epigastric pain, which is like underneath your right rib cage, because that's more concerning for preeclampsia, which we'll talk about later. Constipation, you know how I feel about constipation. So we do a lot of teaching, staying hydrated, eating fiber, taking stool softeners, exercising. Hemorrhoids are really common, so maybe having them use like some preparation H or Tux pads for comfort. Varicose veins also really common because of that pooling that we can get. So we can educate on wearing like support hose, try to avoid standing for long periods of time or sitting for long periods of time, crossing legs. When they are able to, elevating those legs so we can have some venous return, and then nothing tight or restrictive. Edema, another common thing. So similar, we're going to avoid long periods of standing, constrictive clothing, try to elevate feet when we can, try to eliminate extra salt, and then really watching that edema if it's hands or face with preeclampsia. Other discomfort. So there's a table in your book that goes over like a ton of things, but I just kind of put on here some common ones. So some of this we've already talked about: backaches, leg cramps, hemorrhoids, constipation, yada, yada, yada. Okay, some warning signs. So we need to make sure we're telling our patients to call and let us know if they're having vaginal bleeding, swelling in their face or hands, severe headaches, vision changes, abdominal pain, chills, fever, persistent vomiting, fluid from the vagina, dysuria, back pain, pelvic pain, and changes in fetal movement. Now, some of these are kind of vague, and some of these are, back pain in pregnancy. Okay, yeah, but we need to be able to differentiate, back pain from flank pain, back pain from preterm contractions. So just really good assessments on some of these things, and that way we can give reassurance, hey, this is normal, or we should probably bring you in and get you checked out. And then we do talk a little bit about pain management for labor. We talk a little bit more about that when we get to our labor chapters, but I mentioned like birthing classes, relaxation techniques, certain type of like breathing exercises. Anyways, those, we don't have to go into that right now. And then we do discuss sometimes different like birthing options. Like there are certain birthing centers or hospitals or birthing centers within hospitals. There are different rooms that you can get. Like if you're wanting like a water birth or a water labor, you can request that. Home births, we as, nurses don't encourage that, but if you have a patient who says that they're going to have a home birth, that would be something that you need to let your provider know, because that might change their care. And then options for delivery. So we have our OBGYNs, our physicians, we have midwives, and then a doula isn't a person who can deliver babies, but it's a support person. So it's somebody that's there to support your patient throughout their pregnancy, their delivery, their postpartum. So doulas can be a really great thing. Oh, yay! Whew, I felt like I was talking forever. Whew, maybe I shouldn't have powered through because I'm exhausted.